I've rarely been as hyped for a game as Dragon Age 4. After the slam dunk of Trespassers finale, I was so excited to see what was next, constantly typing the name into the search bar for any sliver of updates. I made 3 videos on why I love this series, the incredibly done world building and commitment to its setting, the fleshed out characters that I could find different things to connect with the older I got, the atmosphere of each location like the unsettling Kakari Wilds, the tan coffin that was Kirkwall, or the expansive stretches of the Storm's Coast, and how skillfully it connected your involvement in each game, stitching your impact into the quilt known as the Dragon Age. That was the passion that I held on to as time marched forward, excited for the possibilities. The following were a few questions I was thinking about during the wait. What is Tevinter gonna be like? What kind of character can I make? Do I get to be a warden again? Is my boy Dorian gonna be a companion? What about the Inquisitor? What if they're like Hawk, where you can pick their class and their missing hand offers a unique gadget like a crossbow for a rogue, a mage focus for a caster, or a Sekiro-like prosthetic for a warrior? Wait a minute, if I made the Inquisitor want to redeem Solus, could I play a character who wants him dead? How would the story account for that? How would the game deal with the organization disbanding? And what's going to happen to Solus? Of course, this was playful speculation. I knew whatever released wasn't going to be all I hoped. It's one of the uncomfortable parts about hype. The mental image you create will always be better than the final product. As the years chugged along, that excitement waned quite a bit. The first blow was Project Joplin. The initial concept was the player character was a part of a spy group in the Tevinter Imperium, taking design lessons from Inquisition, offering a smaller scale with plenty of choices and involving consequences, affecting the maps and missions based on what you did. This concept sounded cool, I was all for it. A Dragon Age game that was taking notes from Thief the Dark Project, or in my limited game vocabulary, Dishonored? Sign me up. Upper management said no to that. The project got cancelled to assist in Anthem's development. So when the new concept was codenamed Project Morrison, following up on Inquisition's storyline, and it was going to feature live service components, and that point made me squirm a smidge. I wondered how long I'd be able to play things before they decided to vault the cool parts. Eventually, there was a sick title drop, Dragon Age: The Dreadwolf. And then, nothing. For years, there would be mention of a release date and then a pushback. How about now? Nope, jump the gun. Okay, now we're cooking. Never mind, forgot to bring the propane. At this point, the hype had become a simmer. Of course, I'd love to have it released, but being aware of the development problems, I wasn't sure I was gonna like it. That's a perspective as a fan on the sidelines reading the occasional article. This was before learning that most of the series developers left the company through the tumultuous 10-year development, rebooting 3 different times before releasing as Dragon Age: The Veilguard. I will say, I winced when I saw the reveal trailer. The comic book Meet the Team intros for each character felt at odds with the dark grittiness or heroic fantasy of the previous entries I enjoyed. Balara jumping from an alluvion in a swashbuckler-like delight was a stark contrast to that time my family members died in a political coup in the human noble origin. Then I saw the first mission. While the gameplay looked fun, I was concerned with the presentation, mainly the dialogue and how choices were presented. A few weeks later, I saw a deep dive in combat, and on the mechanical side, I was cautiously optimistic. So at this point, I started to see videos that voiced similar feelings I had, hoping for the best but expecting the worst. So as the October 31st, 2024 release date got closer, I could recognize myself swayed by what I'd seen online, and it wasn't even out yet, and that felt a little silly. So I decided to disconnect. I was going to stay away from the ample and overwhelming bosom that was social media and come to my own conclusions. Hunkered down with 2 potions, a can of Baja Blast, sporting a fun straw, and a water bottle, I sat in front of my laptop, ready to begin this game I'd been waiting nearly a decade for. The reason I spent a good chunk of time with this backstory is because I want to stress that I wanted this game to succeed. It would have been so sick to have this game that has struggled through most of its development become a success story of the industry. That is unfortunately not the story that was told. Dragon Age: The Veilguard has gone through the ringer, initially given great reviews by mainstream press before the hornet's nest of the internet ripped it apart. While there was plenty of vitriol involved that was frustrating to see, there were a lot of fair criticisms levied against it. As someone who's been a fan of these games for years, this was hard to see. It's painful to watch something you care about get beaten like a dead horse on the internet, especially so after the game underperformed and a good chunk of the developers were laid off. An additional point, like a lyrium dagger twisting further into the ribcage, was its launch price of $69.99 right at the end of October, being given away in March of 2025 as PlayStation Network's free game of the month. I find myself conflicted. Veilguard is my least favorite Dragon Age game. A lot of what I loved about the series has been removed, guts being stripped away, creating a sanitized imitation that resembles it at first glance, before peering inside and realizing it's hollow, featuring a cast I mostly struggled to connect with an experience that I was eagerly looking forward to being over at around 50 hours in. With that said, what makes Veilguard hurt more is what it does right. I didn't find Veilguard to hit often, but when it did, it slam dunked. Scenes where that decade wait melts away and you're taken aback in awe. So I wanted to make this video to get into detail articulating that sentiment, the conflicting nature of Veilguard, and why I find it both frustrating, but at times, also great. With that, I want to lay my cards on the table. While I'm going to be critical about this game, my bias from my previous experiences will certainly bleed through. I got no ill will towards the people who worked on it, because frankly, I don't know them. Even if I'm not a fan of this title, the fact they got it shipped out and running smoothly despite the mountains of BS the team encountered over years, that's commendable. So whatever problems I have with Veilguard will be about the game itself, in relation to the standards that were set before. I'll be using quotes and clips of the director and others talking about their design choices and discussing where I could get behind that intention or push back with its execution. Regardless of what info I use, this is written from the perspective of a fan first. Perhaps not the most knowledgeable, but one who cares about this series, and I hope that sincerity is apparent. I'm going to try my best to articulate where I'm coming from, and know you're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments below. Okay, with that said, the stage has been set. Grab a drink and get comfortable, because we begin on a stormy night in the Tevinter Imperium. A decade has passed since the Dreadwolf walked through the Alluvion in Trespasser. Varric has tracked him down to the capital city Minrathous, assisted by his second-in-command and the player character, nicknamed Rook. Setup-wise, I was all for it, and I consider it a highlight of the story. There was a long wait for this next entry, so to have it resume right when Solas's ritual begins makes that wait feel like an interlude. Demons are pouring into the world, break time's over. The mission is linear. Take a few steps and get a good look at Minrathous before all hell breaks loose. It's got more of a cyberpunk look than I expected, especially with the neon-colored lights on buildings and a flying palace with searchlights, quick to fix its eyes on anyone suspicious. Yet, I also think back to Dorian recalling the South always seemed quaint in comparison, and was looking forward to exploring more of the capital. But I'm getting ahead of myself. While I saw most of the sequence in the gameplay reveal, I was still curious to see what this was going to turn into, because the pacing was solid. The tavern shows off dialogue presentation, take a quick stroll before a demon-spawning mad dash, meet up with Harding paired with a tutorial on combat, slide to Dumont Plaza where you meet Nev the private investigator, fight a few demons, then get some quiet time in Solas's old hideout, take a trip through the Alluvion to Arlithan Forest, fight your way through demons, and then confront Solas. While I was absolutely gutted that Morrison wasn't included for Veilguard's soundtrack, the main theme by Hans Zimmer and Lorne Balfe was a great addition, especially for how it's used as your party guns it through the forest. It's got this bombast and tension, much like a blockbuster flick than what I expected from Dragon Age, but in this moment, I could rock with it. I could also see Varric's point in trying to talk Solas down. While I was totally with Harding's response, that wasn't gonna work, and even got to voice that in game, I understand why the rogue would try. At this point, they fought to save the world together. Varric because he was there to help and could make some good writing material, Solas to fix his mistake and further his goal. While the dwarf is skilled with Bianca, his strongest tool has always been his words. You don't create lifelong bonds like those in Kirkwall, and especially not with someone like the very guarded Fenris without knowing how to deal with people. Plus, age has not been kind to Varric. At this point, Hawk could be dead, and so could his brother. With not much to lose, I could get trying a verbal Hail Mary doing what he does best. That said, I'm unsure how much Varric knows about Solas. While he has a great line on him being sentimental, how he pitches it, someone needs to sell him a better option, implies there's an alternative. And if he really knew Solas, he would know that's not a choice at all. As the prologue concludes, the ritual disrupted and the dwarf severely wounded, I found myself right on the same page with Rook as the main theme hit a crescendo. That decade-spanning wait worth it with a moment like this.
Varric! Varric! Oh, no. Nev!
Veilguard's opening hooked me, a strong, action-packed first mission that set the stage for what I wanted to see followed up on, and those closing moments where the camera lapses in time before Rook passes out, then the title drops. Magnifique. And then, there's Solis. Well, there's a lot about Veilguard I'm really not a fan of. I think the game nailed the elven god of trickery. When the game changed its title from Dreadwolf, I was very cautious about losing focus on Solis, because the potential of setting up this antagonist, a previous companion the player already has feelings about, enjoyment, melancholy, anger, sheer annoyance, whatever, and making that emphasis could make an incredible villain. What surprised me was how much I enjoyed how this game tackled it. Since the ritual was disrupted, Solis is trapped in the Fade. Thanks to a crack in the head during the prologue, his only connection to the world is you. And boy, he sure hates that. Since he can't do much, he'll talk to you, giving info on his mortal enemies, the elven gods Elganon and Gillanane, that have just been released into the world. But this is also Solis, so he doesn't keep it professional. He mocks, he jabs. Even in such a trapped position, he still sees you beneath him. While I was watching the making of Dragon Age Veilguard development video, the creative director John Epler had this line on the Dreadwolf.
Solis sees a lot of himself in you, especially the parts of himself that he maybe doesn't like to face. So there is kind of that interesting push and pull between the two characters, Solis and the main protagonist Rook, and you can define what that relationship means. You can continue to be suspicious and hostile towards him, or you can start to see him and find that common ground, find that connection between the two of you, and really develop a different relationship over the course of the story.
I found myself agreeing with this assessment. The conversations with you are constantly shifting tones, angry arguments before begrudging but necessary info dumps. Dismissing his warnings about the gods comes back in the next discussion.
Back so soon. It must have been worse than I had thought.
Hello, Dreadwolf.
But perhaps I am mistaken. You may be here to correct me, to tell me that my concerns were unfounded. You could not possibly be here to take advice from the one you called the Elven God of Lies.
I'm not here to debate whether what you said was accurate.
But to be clear, it was accurate.
And that's what's brilliant about Solis. The logic in his actions are understandable, yet he carries them out like the tragic hero image he buys into, and a contempt for others who he sees as lesser, like his confession at the end of Trespasser. You can both sympathize with the guy and roll your eyes as he positions himself so far up his high horse it's impossible to see him. The scenes where Rook and Solis talk are some of my favorite parts of the game. There's always a tension in these scenes. Each line is a performance, carefully considered, or a sudden moment where the mask drops and you get a view of the person beneath the title. Which itself could be exactly what he wants you to think. Remember, he's the Elven God of Lies. Damn you, Egg, you leave my head scrambled! With this being a new protagonist, there's a different connection with Solis. Before playing the game, I played a character ready to put down the Dreadwolf, even before what happened to Varric, and the occasional line Rook would speak without prompt had me snapping my fingers and going, yes, this is it, boom, bingo.
I had a plan. Varric always said you'd have a big explanation for why none of this was your fault.
Varric.
Yeah, he said that's your style. Never quite lies, clever half-truths that let you convince yourself you're doing the right thing. He tried to talk to you anyway, and now he's hurt.
Varric is quite practiced at shading the truth himself.
These are the moments Rook gets to express themselves with a range of emotions besides positive ones. The writing here is solid. The way lines are reacted to reminds me of what I enjoyed about this series. And while it's only a handful of scenes, every time Solis showed up, I was locked in. Especially in that finale, which is legitimately incredible. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Speaking of, let's talk about our connecting link from the screen to Thetis this time around. Rook. I enjoy this protagonist. While the hero Ferelden and Hawke are still my top two, I can buy into this character more than my Inquisitor. Some of that is tied to personal preferences hitting just right. I thought the British male voice was great. When a line was spoken, I could buy into it thanks to the personal inflections and delivery. My first character was an elf who accidentally resembled Link, so I gave him some cool scars and called it a day. For this recorded playthrough, I picked the same voice as a human and gave silver hair and freckles. What was interesting is the reason I liked the character both times was similar to Hawke. Creating a character in Veilguard functions like an alternate take on Inquisition's approach, mixing player backgrounds from Origins and an established character of two. Where it's different is how much it leans on the personality side. With the Inquisitor, a core defining aspect was their view as the Herald of Andraste and how they led the organization. With the Warden, it was considering what the role meant. How do you conduct yourself without structural guidance? For Hawk, it was choosing the attitude of an already established person. How would they react in this situation? Veilguard leans towards that approach and allows extra tidbits for flavor. Hawk would always be set. Their siblings to Bethany and Carver. The player class would shake up who lived by the time they got to Kirkwall. But that origin growing up in Lothering was fixed. Rook is a strange construct. The character can be human, dwarf, elf, or Quinari. Where it gets different from the previous titles is the additional choice independent of their bloodline, their faction. Comprised of 6 organizations, the player can choose their link to the world, answering the question of what the character has been up to for most of their life. It provides them with the surname, gives perks, and it's an additional aspect for characters to bring up about you or you can reference in conversations. When I read about this in pre-release, the immediate feeling I had was concern. If I think back to that first game, I remember how much focus was on what it meant to be a Grey Warden. If the ends justified the means, if compassion was a strength or a weakness, if I was willing to make personal sacrifices for the greater good. These were fundamental questions that made me love playing that role. I knew Veilguard wasn't about the Wardens in the same way, but if I had the potential to pick that background or 5 others, like being an Antivan Crow, then I assumed the difference would be superficial. Not so much a creed, but a uniform. I could look the part, know some of the lingo, but if someone sat me down and asked what made my identity as a Mournwatcher different from another faction, I'd respond, well, this one has a cool skull near the lapel, which isn't far from the truth in the full release. While I could chime into others, it was treated like we were stirring the conversational pot and I added a few shakes of, hey, check this out, I'm with the Lords of Fortune, and I'll play to the crowd as Taash gives me the thumbs up over the group connection. Yet I enjoyed the occasional spoonful. On my first playthrough, I was leaning towards the Antivan Crows and wanted to try a bruiser type character as a warrior, but went with the Mournwatch. The core event of the Navarran houses fighting each other in the War of the Banners sounded too cool to pass up. When I talked with a companion, Emmerich, hours later, this choice opened a whole different side to the character. While he was the Fate expert with the ability to guide spirits and watch over those who passed, he was also a peer, albeit one that's been around the block a bit longer, yet another orphan taken in to be of service to the living and the dead. And I remember one of my favorite moments with Emmerich was when he asked, when you die, Rook, and hopefully that comes in many, many years from now, what would you want done with your remains? My immediate thought was cremation for those I leave behind or buried somewhere with sentimental value. But then I saw a Mournwatch option that suggested having my bones reanimated to guard the crypts of the Grand Necropolis, and that believability in the character clicked. Here was this person who had this purpose from birth, and during this quiet moment as he talked with a peer, he already planned for when the heart stopped beating. It was flavor, a sickly green mint chunk, and it was delicious. The plot wasn't changing, and this wasn't going to be referenced in an ending slide, but I could see what this faction meant to Rook. And Emmerich gives a nod and says that was a fine choice. That endeared me to him. It gave this cool bond compared to the other companions, that when breath leaves the bodies and the skin comes off, the two might still be around in the ancient crypts of Navarra. The guy became my favorite companion and easily one of the best parts of the game. I'm not sure if that would have happened if I picked a different faction, but in this case, I could work with it. While I struggled with how the game handles choices, there were parts I could appreciate. In the prologue, Varric has this line describing Rook.
One of the strongest pieces on the board, but he tends to think in straight lines.
No matter how you create this character, there's an established shoot first, ask questions later thought process. They're shown to be impulsive. Universally, the backstories have Rook make a judgment call that saves lives, but also gets them reprimanded by higher-ups. While their age isn't directly discussed, the reckless abandon seems to me a more youthful angle. They'll always kick open chests and catch the contents inside when simply bending over and picking it up works just as well. And Rook throws someone out of that shady tavern before the first dialogue choice, featuring options to fight everyone inside or talk it out, where violence is lightly suggested. That attitude is constantly highlighted throughout the game, and I found myself believing the character because of it. It's what made the Solus scenes even stronger. It plays off that quote from Epler about Solus seeing himself through you, the arrogance and the insistence that you did everything right, everyone else dropped the ball. It also made me love the scenes anytime it was between them and Varric. With Rook, the dynamic is like a seasoned master and scrappy apprentice, eager to prove themselves, yet happy to sit back and watch the boss give pointers. And when it's just the two of them, as Rook laments their choices and questions their own capabilities, it got me to think of Duncan, whose time was limited yet left such a strong impression after the ruins of Ostagar. Varric will say exactly what Rook needs to hear. In those scenes, I saw Rook as their own character and was into it. That's what I could get into with Hawk. When I could see the direction the story wanted to take the character and they prioritized that, it was easy to engage. With that said, especially with how factions are implemented, it's a hard pill to swallow that arc is written to be universal for all the backgrounds. What made the origin so cool in the first title was how they changed your engagement with the world. If you played a human noble, you were treated with a lot more grace than playing an elf, not just by key figures, but by regular people too. When I got to Ostagar playing a city elf, I got mistaken as one of the help and got into an awkward conversation. And that could completely change a character's connection to events. Playing a commoner, dwarf, or noble offered a completely different viewpoint of Orzammar, highlighted even further when you return with the treaties and dealing with the right of succession. It's not just what flavor of protagonist you're playing, it's a firmly established place in the world. That's what made the Warden so cool. Regardless of what you picked, your perspective is different from another's. If I play a Dalish and you play a mage, while the main plot is the same, the understanding of its setting is going to be different, more than just reference points. It may be unfair to bring this point up when the series moved away from this direction, but especially when looking at Veilguard and what the intention was, I find it necessary to establish what has been said before. While I found parts to like about it in this version, mainly the established direction and light bits of world building with the Mournwatch, doing another playthrough made that criticism sink in deeper. For the first act, the goal is to learn about your targets and get the squad together, a diverse set of companions hailing from all over the north to combat the gods. As I progressed through this setting, I started to get a feel for how choices were handled, and that was a disappointing revelation. I've talked about this point in my other videos on the series, going into more depth about it with Inquisition. One of the bits that made Dragon Age feel different from other franchises was the emphasis on choices and consequences. Depending on the playthrough, what got followed up was going to vary, perhaps contradicting what you chose, but this was a series that placed a lot of effort in continuing what was set before. It's what makes the title so fun. Dragon Age. The emphasis was on this period of time as the world continued. Choices were sewn down into the age by the player's involvement. That selling point got me to play the games, locking in my investment and eagerly inputting my saves into expansions or sequels, or crafting a world state for Inquisition, looking forward to talking with other fans and seeing what kind of choices they made. That was such an exciting part of the series. And that's what made Veilguard's decision for handling them so devastating. This is a punch that hurts two ways. One specifically in this game that hurts in the noggin, and what gets carried over that aches in the heart. Let's look at what Veilguard brings to the table. Choices for most of the story moments function like this. Here's the situation. You can pick option A or option B. What do you go with? The choices have the same end goal but are slightly different tracks. Moments where you make your choice have a pop-up indicating what you've done that reminds you when a consequence occurs. I find this point to be frustrating at first and aggravating on a second playthrough, because the choices in the moment seem intense and cool, but played again, you realize it doesn't change much. Like the choices between who assists to disrupt the ritual, Nev or Harding. When the press release for the game came out, this was a constant talking point, because whoever assists will be injured. Bruises will be shown on that character throughout the game, which is a cool detail. I've heard people say they felt really bad about their choice. Now, I could be quite the stoic golem for saying this, but I didn't find this interesting, because it's interchangeable. It doesn't matter if Harding's had years of scouting experience and nimble, or Nev has frost magic at her disposal. They'll both get knocked back on the bridge at the exact same moment in the same way. They'll both walk in while you're talking with Varric, and that pop-up reminds you of what you picked. And while I like Rook as a character, I could never buy into the guilt they would feel about their choices, because there were never unique consequences for actions, no screw-ups with no upsides. There would always be some silver lining in what they did. When the outcome is nearly identical, when there are no unique consequences for a choice, the opportunity to make one doesn't mean anything. The story is going to chug along regardless. While I thought the wounds appearing on the companions was cool, I found the way they highlighted this to be overbearing. First, you see the choice while speaking with Varric, then before going through the Alluvion to Arlithan Forest, Rook asks if they're feeling up to it, A cutscene later, they grunt in pain and will be encouraged to stay at the Veiljumpers camp. After the mission where you meet Balara, they insist on going, even when another companion reminds them of their injury, and as you head to Demetis Crossing, Rook asks again, "Are you sure you're alright?" Like, chill game, you're smothering me with this. When Nev was left at camp for the playthrough, I thought mentioning it once and then carrying on would have made the impression stronger, but with it constantly repeated, I was annoyed. I got the impression the game was using repetition to reassure me there were plenty of causes and effects working behind the scenes, but when I pop open the hood, I found the confidence greatly diminished. The story would still occur the same way with a slight difference. Knowing the trick took a lot of the fun out of it. Think of Inquisition. While that game didn't offer many branching storylines, there was still an emphasis on what you got. Mages or Templars, who rules an Orlais, that choice having 5 different outcomes. There was also side content like war table operations and judgments that scratch that itch. The closest comparison would be how Dragon Age 2 handled it. And I agree, that game's finale was frustrating because no matter which side you picked, you were still fighting Orsino and Meredith. Knowing of the development restraints, I could understand why it panned out that way, and it adds to Hawke ultimately being just a regular person and highlighting that theme of powerlessness in the grand scheme. But in Veilguard, the story is about getting things done, banding together with others to save the world, rivaling even the ancient elven gods. Rook can have doubts and fears about their quest, but the game is about having the Veilguard overcome their adversities. So when you can't make your mark on the world besides what's expected, using that same direction as Hawke, that isn't as effective. I love the Kirkwall crew, but gods would be a tall order for a band of buddies who all live in the same crap hole. The fact making choices in this 4th game feels identical to the 2nd that focused on limiting what the protagonist could affect is a shame. Even Veilguard's most dynamic choice suffers from this. So early on, you visit Docktown located in Marathis and Treviso and Antiva. We'll walk the streets, see the beauty and its problems from poverty to military occupancy. You'll meet the companions from both, Nev from the prologue and Lucanus of the Crows. A mission or two later, after recruiting Davrin and Hassan, surprise! A choice! The gods are attacking both cities with blighted dragons. You only have time to save one, while the remaining companions will assist in the other. Nev and Lucanus will be assisting their homelands. The consequences are huge. Whichever city you don't save will be affected by the blight, and problems are exacerbated that lead to different quests or removing options. Like if you save Treviso, deciding whose Archon is off the table, and the companion of the affected city will leave to assist it, returning now hardened, a feature from older titles, slowing their affinity growth, cutting off support skills, and in Lucanus' case, refusing to romance the player character. This is legitimately cool. There's a cause and effect in the world, not just visually changing the map, but affecting the factions within. If Minrathis suffers, the Venatori rise in power and ransack the Shadow Dragon's hideout. While I find that impressive, I still have some frustrations with it. First, because it's a sudden choice thrust upon you. One minute you're doing something else, then bam! Which city do you help? Now, that sense of discombobulation could be the point. Suddenly, the stakes are thrust upon you to make a big decision out of nowhere, and while I'm not the biggest fan, I could see that possibility. With that, I have a question. Respectfully, why Rook? Power-wise, they're not a savant. They could be a mage, but also a warrior or a rogue that's just a part of any faction and not a headliner. When Lucanus comes back during this recorded playthrough saying everyone is blaming you for Treviso's destruction, I thought, why does the fate of an entire city hinge on if this one person with no hidden powers or influence shows up? They're not Tel Vernon, where fate itself forms around their destiny. Whichever city you pick has you fighting through the streets, confronting Gillenane for the first time, then struggling against a dragon before it flies off. In my case, my dude is a rogue treasure hunter. What makes him so special that no other character in the North could do that? And funny enough, whichever city and members you pick, the remaining cast goes to help the other. So it's not like you're ignoring the city to burn, it's not expressed why your other teammates' attempts didn't work. It could have been explained that they didn't have a leader to guide them, so they weren't coordinated and scattered in the chaos. Nothing is explained, just let's make the attempt? That didn't work out. Well, that sucks. Perhaps to have the player meet Gillenane since they possess the Lyrium dagger, but besides that suggestion, I find the logic makes no sense. The best answer I can come up with is because you're the player. To emphasize your importance, you're given the appearance that you are a tangible core part of this story. In this particular example, I don't buy it. A core theme of Veilguard is no one can do it alone. That's true for your companions and the factions who band together to fight the gods. I like my character, but you don't have to sugarcoat it, game. I'm cool with being just the guy with 2 pointy sticks and a bow that hasn't nailed parrying. Bearing the fate of 2 cities seems like a huge stretch. Then there's the choices themselves. Minrathous and Treviso are 2 vastly different places. Experience will assist in that choice, but also the companions' arguments. Minrathous is one of the oldest human settlements on the continent. It has stood the test of time during the Second Blight and when the Quinari attempted to conquer it. It's equipped with plenty of defenses, in addition to being run by mages, like the giant Archon's palace that takes out a pride demon in the prologue. Compare that to Treviso, a merchant city with no defenses besides the crows. It's a strong reason why the Antom have been able to be a part of the city so easily. If you leave Minrathous, the big effect is the Venatori using the opportunity to rise to power. That is certainly a risk. Lucanus' argument sold me during that first run, however. In addition to what's just been mentioned about the merchant city, if it gets blighted, it's going to poison the water supply. Treviso sounded like it would be mega screwed, so my choice was locked in, because that affects everyone. While in-game it's not as devastating as it sounds effect-wise, in the moment the choice was easier than I initially expected. For this version, I picked the opposite just to see the effect. Doing a second playthrough deflated that excitement to make choices. When the story continues in a very similar way, it makes your involvement feel cheap. A slight difference offers a pop-up in case you forgot. I think this was cool in dialogue exchanges, as you're reminded of tones and previous attitudes. But outside of it, I found that to be lacking confidence that the player couldn't figure it out. And there might be something to that. In Demeda's Crossing, you walk through the blighted town that functions as an early taste of this new blight. Visually, I loved it. The atmosphere was the closest to Origin's dark fantasy focus. I was looking forward to how it panned out. Meeting the Veil Jumper Jahel added to this, as the organic take on the blight pulses, draining the remaining life out of him before blood soaks the ground. Then the tension gets deflated like a whoopee cushion with the trapped mayor. Here's a choice: free him or let him rot. Its effects get spelled out by the characters. What this got me to think was how much more effective the Crestwood storyline in Inquisition was, where to deal with a Fade Rift, you get the mayor's permission to drain the lake. You see the wreckage of an older version of the town traveling through the watered ruins, and after closing the rift, the mayor flees, leaving a confession. During the 5th Blight, Crestwood had taken in refugees. Majority of them had the taint in their blood. Fearing the infection to spread as Darkspawn closed in, the order was given to move them to the lower part of the settlement, then initiating a flood, killing the source. The quest could end right there, or the Inquisitor can demand justice, tracking them down with a war table operation and dispense their judgment. That was such a cool choice, because it had nuances to it. The mayor's actions could be seen as monstrous or pragmatic, making a judgment call to save the majority, and years later he's still haunted by what he's done, but chooses to abscond instead of accepting punishment, only doing so on his knees as the Inquisitor dispenses their verdict. Your options could have him executed, judged by the people of Ferelden, exiled, or if you had completed Here Lies the Abyss before finishing the quest, induct him into the Wardens as a poetic punishment involving the taint he tried to stop years ago. I bring this up not just because I love that questline, seriously, if you're playing Inquisition and haven't tried it, please do, it's brilliant, but because it highlights my frustrations with this moment. Like Crestwood, you're making a verdict with a mayor who screwed over his citizens. In the former, it was a judgment call to prevent the blight from spreading. In this case, it was from mind control from the gods and a love for shiny coins. I don't find that nearly as interesting. Balara and Nev will argue with each other, a rare moment where the companions will disagree, but I found myself just thinking, whatever dude, I don't know, just cut him loose, I guess? In Act 2, while in a Venatori camp, I ran into the mayor again, only knowing so because a pop-up told me it was him and went, oh, he's here. Huh. I found a good chunk of the choices to be very unsatisfying. While I've articulated my issues with the Minrathous and Treviso choice, overall, I am impressed with what the development team was able to do with that moment, and that seriously deserves props. The map even changes exploring it for the rest of the game. The aspect I'm not as gung-ho about is the handling of legacy choices. As the series developed, this was going to be more and more of a difficult problem. While I loved how Inquisition did it, offering codexes or some extra lines from characters, I get even that's a huge amount of work for details only a handful of players are going to experience. So when it was discussed by John Epler and game director Corinne Bush, they wanted to scale down what got carried over to make what they did feel impactful. As a longtime fan, that stung like a swarm of Sarah's bees, but I tried to smile through the pain, excited for the possibility of what was going to be in the game and how that would affect the story. So, all the choices hinge on the Inquisitor. The three are as follows. Number 1, who did they romance? Number 2, what of the Inquisition? Is it a part of the Chantry or disbanded? And number 3, what is their attitude with Solus? Aiming for redemption or whatever it takes to stop them. This is something I was really looking forward to seeing in Veilguard. With that said, I can't help but think there should be other decisions that could have been focused on. Like, for example, take the Champion of Kirkwall's implementation from the game before. Their personality could be imported as well as their class and appearance with the Frostbite engine. While the Inquisitor can be customized, their class or tone is unimportant. No matter what character you played, they'll still wear the Tevinter-styled PJs. They'll show up at the tavern, say, "Hey guys, it's me, the Inquisitor. We're doing everything we can in the south against the Blight to end all blights. You do you, Rook." A big choice I was baffled wasn't included was who drank from the Well of Sorrows. This was a huge plot point near the end of Inquisition, the Sipper becoming a servant to Mathal, the elven goddess of love, originally housed by Flemeth before her death. With the story focusing on the elven gods, you'd think that would be a big enough deal to get mentioned, practically guaranteed when both the Inquisitor and Morrigan, the two options, are in the same room together. It is never talked about. Okay, so sidestepping that frustration, what are the effects of your choices? After all, the intention was to make them really count. So to see this firsthand, I recreated two different Inquisitors. The first was Akada Dar, my first full playthrough character who romanced Josephine, who wanted to redeem Solus and disbanded the Inquisition. Inquisitor 2 was Hartwig Trevelyan, the human warrior who romanced Dorian, reformed the Inquisition as part of the Chantry, and intended to hunt down his former companion. Let's look at choice 1. Who did you romance? How do you feel about handwritten notes? Whoever you picked will have a unique codex entry to their love. While they're quite well written, fitting as a natural extension from the characters we've loved a decade ago, that's it. The huge exception is if you romance Solus. If their other results feel like someone half listening to you, kissing the Eggman is where they perk up. That romance gets discussed multiple times and even affects one of the endings. While I'm happy for those players, there is a strong pull of FOMO with that one compared to others. I had Hartwig romance Dorian because he's Dorian Parvis. As a romance or as a best friend, that guy's an absolute delight. And seeing how he shows up in Veilguard, I was curious how the game would take that into account. I can recall one line and a letter. That's it. A very impactful choice indeed.
You all right, amateurs? Because if you're putting on a brave face...
I'm fine, Dorian. I promise.
So option 1 has slight differences and a big one if you romance Solus. What about option 2? The fate of the Inquisition. In Trespasser, I had such a satisfying arc when I disbanded the organization, remembering that story of Mother Giselle of the original faction and sheathing the arms when it served its purpose. We did what we had to do, and then it was done. And I was so excited to see if that idealism would be challenged in the next game. How would a smaller band finding Solus affect the story? The answer is not much. Harding mentions the organization scaled down to conversation, and then the Codex? That's it. Pretty much the same thing if you're a part of the Chantry. What about option 3, vowing to redeem or slay Solus? A different line of dialogue? That's it. The lack of choices carrying over was a bummer, but I can understand why it's done in concept. Playing the game twice, I very much disagree that your legacy choices had any real significance unless you were playing Solus Romance that is exclusive to female elf inquisitors. If you're playing anything else, I hope you enjoy an extra codex or two. It can make for a great read, but as a reflection of the world, it leaves a lot to be desired. But here's the bizarre part. Big, instrumental parts of the series get danced around. Relationships get referenced that never happened. Here's a word that may get you to ask some questions. Morrigan's son. Through the series, her role has been seeming to function like Flemeth's, to assist figures of destiny to ensure great events occur in the world, like her assisting the Inquisitor or helping in this game. But with how long she's been in the series, her identity has branched out in so many ways there is no clear picture. She may have partaken in the Dark Ritual, had a child with Alistair, Loghain, or the Warden, that offspring being a child of the Old Gods or a regular boy if you pursued a romance with her. She could have been stabbed at the end of Witch Hunt, or a servant of Mythal. Core choices for a character. In Veilguard, they are never discussed, and the game has to awkwardly dance away from talking about it because there's no established route. So as much as I enjoy Morrigan, I was bummed to see her show up because she felt like a plot device. Now the host of Mythal after Flemeth's death. Hey, would that affect how she engages with the Inquisitor if he drank from the well? Would that change anything about her if she took a sip instead being the host and servant? Veilguard responds, what well? And what's worse is if the game never wanted to follow up on it, so be it. An argument for why a lot of the choices weren't referenced was because you were in a different pocket of the world, so your actions in the south wouldn't affect what's going on in the north, written as a justification. Sure, fair enough. But when the T-ball is set and you've decided to limit referencing what's come before, why go back and pick and choose parts that undo that intention? The scab is healing and now it's been ripped off. This also undercuts the intention not to invalidate what you did before. Isabella makes a return as the Lords of Fortune leader and will say her time in Kirkwall truly taught her what family meant, to where I'm betting the developers may have forgotten the detail she was an optional companion. It's the same with Dorian. The character is fantastic, but the cameos of Veilguard hinge on the player taking them along for the ride. When in their titles for both, it was an equally valid choice to say, no thanks, I'm good, or completely ignore their questline and stick with those mandatory companions. I hadn't done a full playthrough like that. The closest I ever got was kicking Sarah out of the Inquisition, but that choice was still there. By limiting the amount of legacy choices the player could have made, then reincorporating Sun, but then writing it one particular way, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. If they weren't meant to be used, so be it. Morrigan's inclusion is an embodiment of that frustration. Even with the essence of Mythal, there are topics that could be slotted into a conversation and the dialogue will never bring them up. With the appearance of this character I have grown to enjoy, I am convinced this is just a really masterful skinwalker, passing themselves off as a fan-favorite character. But choices, whether from before or during the game, are on and off. A core underlying issue I have with Veilguard is the North itself. Throughout the 3 games, Thedas has been a main character. Each setting was a core point of their experiences, not just visually, but when you walk around those lands, you were entrenched with the world and how it worked. The people living within had beliefs and preferences that clashed with your own. That emphasis made this setting stand out in a landscape of great RPGs. This wasn't just a generic take on fantasy with a few core aspects with nothing to say. Dragon Age was its own thing. What I found made the world building so engaging was its grittiness. Thedas was a land where the bounds between heroes and villains were uncomfortably close. The core thing that differentiated them was the consequences of their actions. This was a setting that would deal with dark topics, and not just the first game. What I found myself impressed with in 2 was how human the core threat between mages and Templars were. There was no big villain pulling the strings. It was people all from varying perspectives dealing with a conflict that had become bigger than themselves. There was magic and powerful artifacts, but it reminded me of the alignment heroes of Shin Megami Tensei, where the power or transformations were more a tool for their strength and convictions. This was a landscape where no one's hands were clean. Wardens were viewed as the good guys in Origins, but historically they're neutral, made for a specific purpose. When that gets complicated is where a lot of the problems come in. Or that mission can be perverted, like in Inquisition with Here Lies the Abyss. I found the Qun and the Qunari to be so fascinating because it attempted to categorize life where reality was a lot more messy, engaging to hear from those who took that mission seriously. You could find things about it that were disagreeable, but also understand what made it so appealing for those to believe or understand. In these games, that grittiness and its consistent world building was an absolute delight. The darker parts could be categorized as a bit much by some, but I thought that's what made the world engaging, exploring themes a lighter story would shy away from. It wasn't trying to be a power fantasy, it was a world with a history of conflict. While Inquisition was lighter, leaning in more of a high fantasy direction, it added engagement with Orlais, giving first-hand accounts for how the game was played. We saw different lands, and it's heavily focused on the dominant religion of Thedas. Each game felt like a piece to a wider picture as they slot into place. While some core aspects were constant, they always felt like they were adding something to the whole. So when Trespasser hinted at the Tevinter Imperium as the next location, I was so excited. Because that place made the rest of the world sound like a delightful walk in the park. Very impressive considering how broodmothers are made. Tevinter is like the Empire from Star Wars. The more you learn about it, the more you understand why everyone despises it. Originally, the dominant nation spreading its influence across the continent so effectively, Genghis Khan would look in admiration, thanks to its influence from the old gods. The power that greatly decreased thanks to blights, Quinari invasions, and righteous crusades known as exiled marches. It's a land where the strong prevail, not physically but with magic. For the remaining world, it's a dark mirror and a scapegoat for why magic must be controlled. The rumors of ancient magisters causing the first blight attempting to reach the Maker's Golden City certainly doesn't help its case either. It's also a land where slavery is legal, a thought process that Dorian argues for if you ask him about it in Inquisition. But there's also something interesting about it. It withstood so much and still stands. While other parts of the world aren't morally superior, there is a darkness within the nation. And you can get a sample of that in Kirkwall. It was once capital of the slave trade, and that influence makes a strong impression for anyone playing the game, for better or worse. So when the stage was set to explore it, I was so excited. I love good world building where characters have views reflected of their cultures, no matter how bizarre from reality, because it gets you to consider how it breeds people to think like this. You can do a lot with a concept like that. The series has constantly established it can do a smashing job. Loghain is such a good example. At first a seemingly evil character that would rub his hands together and cackle as lightning strikes in the background. When you know his history of championing Ferelden's independence from Orlais who ruled over them, it adds a dimension to him. His call at Ostagar a necessary evil to unite the land so that kingdom will never enslave them again. The Blight was a bigger issue, but when you hear his perspective, you see how that life experience led to paranoia of this issue. They even took his dog for Maker's sake, those pompous mask-wearing bastards! Dragon Age is willing and has done this before. So with all of this buildup, knowing how bad this place is, it's gonna be amazing. Because as dark as it is, Parvis held out hope there are redeeming parts about it. What's it going to be like to explore? During that exploration of Veilguard's take, I got the impression the grit has been rubbed down to create a smoother, more welcome experience for newcomers, but dissipated much of what made time in the South special. Minrathous is a big example. In the prologue, I was into it. The visuals were a bit more cyberpunk than I was expecting, but the atmosphere was strong. This was going to be such a cool location to explore. But it appears that idea was a masterful use of street magic, taking my sovereign, and for their next trick they'll disappear down the alley in a crowded market. The heart of the city is off the table as an explorable zone. Your gateway is Docktown, the harbor district full of the middle and lower class looking to make ends meet, sporting Venatori occupying the streets and away from crowds, demons to beat. While I traveled through Docktown, I was wondering why this was the focal point of Minrathous. Tevinter is a mageocracy with a huge emphasis on nobles and blood magic, a small percentage ruling in a position highly sustained by the majority. This would have been such an interesting concept to explore. See how one of the oldest human societies is run and challenge our cultural beliefs, from previous games or in real life, asking us to consider how much ambition is needed in a nation that is constantly reaching for the heavens, and if the cost of the ever-increasing pool of blood raising them higher is justified in the name of progress. But it doesn't. The plot is so focused on the Elvic gods, we don't get to explore any dynamics exclusive to the Tevinter established before, and when time is given, it's not about the nation, but Docktown. The Shadow Dragons are meant to be a counterbalance of the powerful, fighting blood magic, slavery, and corruption within Tevinter. But because Veilguard doesn't define or display those problems within its world besides a general blood magic is involved, there is never a sense there is real adversity in this conflict. No overwhelming threat that is being overcome. They're the bad guys? We're not. Let's go kick ass. The Venatori in previous games were known as very nationalistic to Tevinter. They served Corypheus to bring about another glory age for their homeland. The Templar antagonist of Inquisition, Calpurnia, was a Tevinter slave, and truly believed if she assisted, she could make it a place where those shackled would have a seat at the table. In Veilguard, the Venatori are just generic bad guys. There's no national pride. They offer their assistance to the elven gods for power. Screw Tevinter, that place is for chumps. There's a scene later where they tear a Hala apart with magic and cheer as its organs fly across the platform. They use people as furniture. These weren't believable villains, they were waves of enemies I could have fun mowing down. There's no argument for their position, no antagonist with a kernel of truth buried underneath their villainous actions. That is not what's focused on. Dogtown is frustrating because of that. As a player, you'll walk through the crowded districts and see people on the streets sharing their stories or mentioning how rough life is. It's a general display without going into any depth. What sums up my frustration is charity. As you walk around, you see unfortunate souls asking for coins. You can walk up, press a button, and place one in the bowl. The person will offer their thanks. When I was first playing, I would walk up to each person and offer a coin. I didn't have much use for them, so why not, right? Losing a coin with every prompt. When I would keep coming back to the zone, they would be in the same spot. The longer I played, the more I became ambivalent to it. What at first was a cute detail of world building, after enough time just became a prompt that wasn't a real choice, but the appearance of one. That offering didn't change anything. I couldn't give more than one coin. I couldn't talk with them. It was just set dressing, which was delicious at first, but now I'm sick of the taste. I think back to Origins, where you could give a coin to a starving veteran in the alienage of Denerim, come back to see that veteran now has an orphan whose mom is especially dead and asks for more coins. Come back again to find an entire group waiting for you. It's a funny bit that also was a consequence of your choices. You gave someone money, and they told their buddy, who then after getting some, told their buddies, and now this crowd is hoping to get in on that. Except that one guy wearing fine clothes. Please open up your coin pouch, you kind noble sir. The poverty of this place wasn't a focus of Minrathous lore, but that's what it chooses to showcase. And I have played this game 2 times, and in truth, I can't give you a reason why the people in Dogtown are struggling. Veilguard doesn't give an answer. It is because it is. That's it. I will say mechanically, I thought Dogtown was a cool map. There's an emphasis on verticality, like a warehouse door being locked so you climb up the scaffolding to enter in from one above someone left open by accident, or entering through tunnels and exiting through the secret base of the Shadow Dragons, or traveling even further below and fighting a secret demon in a side quest starting as hushed rumors. In those moments, climbing from place to place, Dogtown was a level I couldn't get enough of. As the long-awaited engagement with the Tevinter Imperium, it left a big chip on my shoulder. And as a place to live, I couldn't buy into Dogtown, which is a shame because I can tell the game wants you to. Your companion Nev has been a resident all her life. She knows all the hottest spots and shortcuts, and through her side quests, you can see this place is a part of her. Dogtown is not just a hub for jobs, it's a home and she cares about it. When I was getting a rundown of the city, she asked a beggar if they had someplace to stay from the demons in the night. She has relationships with informants and others trying to do their best, like the Templar Reyna, who have the same goal but differ on how they approach it. But that intention was still countered to knowing this was the Tevinter Imperium. You could put Nev in a different location and his story would have been nearly identical. When there was the threat of Venatori and bringing in the Threads gang, I was ambivalent because I saw there was no defining string connecting any of it. I was looking forward to an exploration in one of the most vilified nations in Thedas. BioWare replied, how about a cool gumshoe helping out the downtrodden? If this game could have mixed both, having Ned's storyline exploring another side of Tevinter, that would have been so awesome and scratched that itch. But as it hides its established bodies a little too well and insisting they never existed in the first place, my time riding shotgun with the private detective made me indifferent to closing the case. The one group that really had me confused was the Antivan Crows. When I heard that name being mentioned as a playable faction, there was a mechanical uneasiness, but also a question of how they would be portrayed. Any mention of the Crows was met with suspicion, a syndicate of killers ensuring that any mission was followed through. In Inquisition, during a war table operation, they'll offer their services. Cullen and Josephine will regard them with disgust. This is not a group known for a good reputation. They have serious influence in Antiva, bordering on corruption as they have removed royalty and loosened blood from noble houses. That ruthlessness has prevented other nations from directly attacking, despite the lack of a proper military. The group makes a strong impression on the player, especially if they took Zevran along as a companion.
The Antivan Crows send their regards.
During the 5th Blight, Zevran is hired by Arl Howl to make sure you and your party meet an untimely end. An ambush is planned and sprung as a random encounter traveling to the next treaty spot. Being a skilled warden, you handle the group with ease, or in my case, restart a few times as you pray your hits land and spam healing potions with great fervor. As the crow lays dying, moments away from death, he offers to assist with your plans, and Tivo wants nothing to do with him since he failed a contract, and if you're willing, he'll offer his blade if it'll get him to delay the end. And the game is perfectly fine with you killing him right there. Your party members will criticize the suggestion to bring him along, but you're also top Mabari, and they will ultimately go along with it. Zevran is at complete odds with what you expect, rather upbeat considering the circumstances and quite candid about his life, and surprisingly, he's a great pal. And that upbeat attitude contrasts a dark history. When he was 7, he was sold into the Crows for 3 sovereigns. As he puts it, the Crows buy all their assassins this way. Buy them young, raise them to know nothing else but murder, and if you do it poorly in your training, you die. Compete with your peers, and whoever is left standing with the knife gets the perks of such a position. Wealth, respect, attention from those you fancy. It's real mobster stuff. Yet he mentions a sobering reality with this glamorous lifestyle, articulated in one of my favorite quotes in the series.
It's a cage, if a gilded cage. Pretty, but confining.
To be a crow is to be expendable. Dance on the edge of being taken out yourself when stepping out of line. Much like Zevran's situation failing to kill the warden. Crows will attack your party in the Denerim streets, and even in the sequel, he's still being hunted down by them. The crows are a reminder, a message from a higher power than any individual person. That of Coin, handled with the grace of a true professional. That is how the faction has been portrayed. So when I walked through the streets of Treviso and saw this group displayed as these underdogs fighting to free the city from Antam occupation, I was baffled. It showed a mob family all in positions of power talking about their love for each other, but completely ignored the other part that makes them a mob. The darkness danced around, unless it was dealing with an already dastardly Venatori. The aesthetics of cool assassins with titles like Talon or Feathered Guard is there, but choosing not to display the ruthlessness that makes them powerful to begin with took a lot of fun out of engaging with this organization. Now, while I was writing this, I came across some info that suggests the events Zevran brought up could have led to a reconfiguration of the organization. A line like that even gets mentioned by Lucanus. To that, I wonder if that's the case, then wouldn't that be a defining legacy choice to make? Because remember, Zevran could be finished off during that initial ambush. That would hinge on him being alive to see that progress through. But if this was an answer for the intended direction, I wish there would have been more of an explanation or narrative reason for this change than just, ta-da, these are the crows now. Thedas is a place that is changing, and the intentions with each game can too. If there is a change, and a big change of what's been established, I think people could roll with it. If there is a gradual progression, or at least time spent dedicated to articulating how this came to be, like a character arguing their perspective, perhaps referring to the past as to why they're going in a different direction, I could get that. That's the reason I like the Grey Wardens being antagonists in Inquisition. While I've got a soft spot for them with a personal bias and cool factor, with how the faction is positioned at ending the Blight at all costs, I could totally get behind that direction, because while they were acting differently, they were following through with what their order was about in a final gamble before their predicted end. Of course, the world of Thedas would clown on them for this, but as a player, I could see that transition from a group that saved the world in Origins to almost ending it in the third. But in Veilguard, it's never addressed why it's different now. Rook is placed in a scenario to hunt down a mage killer for the team. He meets a higher up of the Crows, talks with the family, and they send him on his merry way. And you'll pop back in from time to time, assisting with the organization or walking the streets for Lucanus' questline. Treviso is visually really striking, and I got a kick walking around the stalls and buying a bunch of knickknacks to support local businesses. But besides the visual aesthetics, I never got the impression I was really in the nest of the Antivan Crows. In fact, all the organizations feel this way. Each faction plays a role in dealing with the threat of the gods, and they're positioned as allies who would help if they could, but there's something getting in the way, and because of that, they need help first. Their faction strength increases the more you assist them with quests, but it's the same approach that makes all of them blend together. The core difference is what kind of quests you'll do, such as the Lords of Fortune having a fighting arena to gain a reputation or dealing with Darkspawn for the Wardens. They function the same, just with different aesthetics. Each group has a faction leader or co-leaders. They're happy with Rook, especially so if you're part of the group, which boosts strength faster, but there's no suspicion. One guy a part of the Shadow Dragons has misgivings, but as quickly gets hand-waved as the enemy enemy of my enemy is my friend logic. With the world-ending threat, I can understand the idea of forging alliances to save the world, but there's no struggle to get them on your side. The previous games established that people can have the same goal for peace yet disagree on how to achieve it. Like when the breach occurred during Inquisition, people looked at this newfound order, one founded using the same name and permission straight from the dominant religion of the world, with heavy suspicion. People thought your character was a charlatan. It made that eventual moment when you entered the Winter Palace and everybody was kissing up to your character and kingdoms would actually start listening to the group so rewarding, because you had to work for that respect. It wasn't given freely. That concept is so fascinating in storytelling, explored in stuff like The Wheel of Time or the Banner Saga, where the world is on its last legs. Instead of banding together, kingdoms are so focused on themselves and their priorities that they would rather squabble for who owns the biggest pile of wreckage. But here, every faction will happily assist. The closest disagreement is the First Warden. During my playthrough of Origins and recording footage, I came across this comment from another warden about those from Weishaupt and his view of them.
The wardens there, they fight darkspawn like you and me, but they're shaped by the winters there in the forest. They're a cold group and don't care like they should about the rest of the world. Their king is weak, and many Enders look to the wardens to rule. I hate to say this, but some of them seem to want it that way.
I found this really exciting, especially knowing we get to see it firsthand in this recent game. The closest we get to this original intention is the First Warden, and even he isn't that bad. Very stubborn, bordering on frustrating? Absolutely. But someone with good intentions that can be clocked or talked with during the attack of the fortress, even saying, "You were right, I wasn't." It just takes him a while to get there, yet he'll assist. But the rest of the wardens you interact with, like Antoine or Evka, are great. Davrin is solid as well. So when Davrin mentions how the wardens here are troubled, we don't get to see it, and while it implies something interesting, it is never explored. Every faction is on the same page, not just with intention, but morally principled. The Shadow Dragons oppose all of the negative aspects of the Venatori and Tevinter culture. The Crows are fighting for freedom in Treviso. The Wardens combat the Blight. The Veil Jumpers function like archaeologists exploring aspects of Elvish lore. While most are elves, anyone can join. And besides your companion Balara, none of them seem bothered that their deities of their nearly forgotten history actually exist and are now fighting against them. There is no callback to the elves who rally behind Solus in a world that sees them as lesser, like in Trespasser. There's no exploration in how this could affect relationships with the other races, or cause distrust of the elves, even those who did absolutely nothing wrong being punished for acts they didn't do because only a certain portion decided to help out the god of rebellion. Inquisition spent so much time exploring the world's reaction to the suggestion of your character being the Herald of Andraste. When actual gods walk the earth, that isn't focused on besides an incredibly general, "that sounds bad, we should stop it." That's not given attention, but the group really gets a kick out of exploring old technology. Beautiful forest though, the multicolored trees mixing with ruins and old tech creates a cool look. The Mournwatch stands vigil, respecting the balance of life and death, twisting the dynamic of the evil necromancer with one of compassion, one that functions more like a shepherd than an enslaver. Legitimately, I think that's such a cool concept. But then, there are the Lords of Fortune, a group of treasure hunters who are also positioned as a good aligned group, not rogues taking shiny objects at the expense of old ruins or others, only from the bad people who will happily return objects of cultural significance for a finder's fee. That takes the punch out of the idea of pirates, taking the aesthetic but removing anything that could be considered problematic in a group about taking things that aren't theirs in the first place. Which is weird because Isabella, who leads the organization, has stolen plenty of things from other people. In 2, the whole Quinari stuff happens because she stole a text from the culture's founder. No time is given to explain this change of heart, just, hey, this is how Isabella is now. When you put them all together, each is positioned as a positive force in the world. Besides individual jabs from the First Warden to your character, there is no conflict for any one of the groups assisting. They're all in their pockets of the world and will come together for the final mission. There is no corruption in the order to root out, no uncomfortable history to explore that changes the group besides personal revelations in companion quests like Davrin's. It really comes down to aesthetics, and because of that, I wasn't invested in the factions as legitimate shapers of the world, which also made me disappointed in this trip to the north. This didn't feel like an extension of the previously established setting, rather a more palatable version where the uncomfortable aspects has been shined away, creating a space where right and wrong things are separated and rarely mingle into a morally gray mess. Which is a shame, because the mess is what I loved about this series. The villains are villainous without a point. The heroes all work together because that's what they do. There's no conflicting attitude about what the right thing would be in a situation besides a verbal remark, then carries on like normal. For lack of a better term, Veilguard feels like an average superhero team-up movie. The characters live in a secret location cut off from the rest of the world who gear up and do missions against a world-ending threat. Hunkered down in the Fade, I had a hard time believing our characters were a part of it. There were nice scenes like traveling with Nev and Lucanus as they walk through their home city, using shortcuts or knowing which stalls to hit for our companion meals. But there was always a disconnect. News was given to us by letters or sent with representatives. We weren't an organization, we were 9 buddies hanging out in our hand-me-down base from Solus, stopping over to each other's rooms to talk shop or hang. The Veilguard weren't an extension to the world, they were apart from it. What can make superhero team-up movies really cool is how the group connects with each other, overcome their struggles, or put aside their biases and save the world. That's a core reason why I really loved the James Gunn Suicide Squad movie. The threat by itself was alright, but it was more how this group of social rejects bounced off each other. There was certainly affection for each other, like Ratcatcher 2 and Bloodsport, but it's also balanced out with his relationship with Peacemaker. A rivalry spawned with how effective the two are at their professions and who's better. While the movie can be a lot of fun with a very offbeat kind of humor, a lot of the driving force is the character dynamics. That's the stuff that gets you invested with thoughts like, I sure hope King Shark is going to make it through this, as the movie heads towards the climax. Veilguard put a huge emphasis on the companions. A reason for the title change was to reflect this intention, and this is supported with quotes from former executive producer, then consultant for the title, Mark Dara and Corinne Bush.
And in this game, we're finally putting that intentionality first and foremost, putting the characters first, building the game around those character moments, around those characters.
Previously, it feels like the companions are going on an adventure with me, the main character, whether it's the hero Ferelden or Hawk, you name it. But in Dragon Age the Veilguard, in many ways, the companions are so fleshed out that it feels as though I'm going on a journey with them. I'm exploring how they think and feel. I'm helping them through their problems. We're working through their unique character arcs. They feel like my dear friends, and I absolutely adore them.
I really wish I loved these characters as much as she did. Who wouldn't like another crew to get attached to? With this intention, placing that emphasis on the companions, this cast needed to hit it out of the park for this to work. So how did they do? Well, speaking for myself here, the Veilguard cast would be the type of people I could count on for a class project in high school. We would show up, perform our roles, and we would part ways amicably and continue with our lives. We wouldn't get food afterward or hang out after hours, it's strictly professional. I thought the cast was fine, but I wasn't very impressed. Don't get me wrong, there were great moments peppered throughout, and one character's questline got me intrigued after playing it, but the rest didn't grab me. I didn't hate any of the companions, but especially with how much focus was given, I found them underwhelming. Breaking it down, I would say this is from 3 points. Assumptions about the player, how the game handles questlines, and characterization. One of the most important lessons you learn running a Dungeons & Dragons campaign is what you find interesting will not be the same as the players. You can make a compelling NPC, write paragraphs of history and motivations, plan monologues to deliver in that perfect tone of voice you've been practicing in the shower, and your players can take one look and say, I'd like to cast Magic Missile. It's a frustrating but humbling experience. What you value may not be the same thing the players do, and a good DM can roll with the punches and pivot. Assuming is a dangerous thing to count on, especially when player choice is allowed. I say this because one of my biggest criticisms of Veilguard as an RPG is the fundamental assumption I will love these characters. Act 1 is about getting the crew together, traveling to different parts of the north, rallying the Veilguard. Each companion has this initial moment of introduction in their level before a cutscene plays hinting at what is to come. After the Siege of Weishaupt, a legitimately fantastic level with incredible set pieces that makes the world-ending threat really sink in, the party is a bit shaken with their personal problems, so the game says directly, I guess we need to work through our own issues to give our full attention to this, kicking off Act 2 as their quest lines open up more. The first bit that's got my jimmies twisted into pretzel knots is how with this emphasis on the companions, there is no accounting for the player's input engaging with them. Previous games in the series would present you with options. You could meet Alistair jesting with a mage in Ostagar, see how he conducts himself and go, "This guy sucks," as your first words with him are antagonistic. Most companions were optional. You could miss characters or outright refuse to have them on your team, and that choice was respected. Even the mandatory ones could be removed in Origins, like the fellow warden leaving the party if Loghain joins the Order, who could also be executed or exiled depending on choices. On my first playthrough, Morrigan left the party after I refused her offer to sideways salsa before the final battle. In Dragon Age 2, characters could be ignored or gain rivalry points with Hawke, giving perks and changing their dynamic, even being an opponent in the final mission. Inquisition could have the player reject companions from the Order or even lose them if disapproval is low enough, their questlines having options going against their wishes. For Vivian, you can swap hearts for the potion, killing her betrothed, and when confronted, you can say,
"You're manipulative and shallow, and I wanted you to fail."
You may never have picked those choices, but they served a function. Throughout all the games, there were multiple ways to engage with characters, as someone you like or despise, and that gave you agency in the game. If you found a character frustrating, you could voice that, or be supportive in a different moment, because they were choices, not just big character defining ones, but small bits in the moment. They felt impactful. A choice is meaningful when there is an option to do the opposite. That's what makes being a good or bad character interesting, because it's a deliberate act on your account. I rarely take over-the-top evil options in video games, but because they exist, it validates my decision to be good. In Veilguard, you don't have that option. Companions will stay in the party no matter what. You can gain disapproval depending on choices, but negative affinity isn't put into a rivalry bar, it slows the speed of characters leveling up. So it's not a trade-off, it's a punishment. But when you talk with companions, you most often have three options: a positive supporting choice, a positive quippy choice, and a positive stoic choice. I'm betting you notice that universal aspect, they're all fundamentally the same option. You're saying something that's intended to be nice, and it can be in different flavors, but it's the same effect. And this frustrates me because being nice isn't a choice, it's expected. A rigged game where I can't engage with these characters in any way that deviates from being positive, but I can certainly flirt with them. I'm betting that assumption is why Veilguard shies away from party conflict. When characters disagree, it's very cordial and wrapped up during the scene. The most intense is Zevran and Lucanus at the end of Act 1. Both are frustrated at the other with the god's business, and that one gets wrapped up so quickly with the classic, "Brothers, can't you just get along?" And they both say, "Okay." The game is trying to forge this found family dynamic, but it forgets that families fight, not just with shallow arguments, but about deep issues, where finding a common ground takes patience, people aren't pleasant all the time, and where you love each other despite yourselves. The game narrows in on the positive aspects, and sometimes it works. Having your companions pursue romances outside of your character is cool. It creates the idea that they have their own agency and pursuits above yours, not just with each other, but even side characters. Yet the lack of focusing on the messier aspects of the family dynamic makes it feel artificial. It's like a friend group that's hyper positive all the time and loves everybody, and then when something unpleasant happens, they vanish. Like, no, guys, come back, the mess is part of the process. The Zevran and Lucanus conflict could have been so interesting. Both characters are greatly driven by their duty, Zevran to the Wardens and Lucanus to the Crows. There could have been an emphasis on their distaste for the other's allegiances, debating the legitimate points about the group's blind spots that gets the player to think, like how Dorian and Blackwall would argue about the Wardens, and how they bonded through that party banter is really cool. That kind of stuff would have been great to focus on. As is, the characters are so agreeable, I have a hard time really believing this is a real group. So when it starts with everyone already liking each other and ends the same way, that arc of coming together feels cheapened. Sure, they went through their own story arcs, but as a group, it felt like I was saying very dryly, "Veilguard, assemble." The objective was there, but the heart wasn't. Speaking of, point 2, the questlines. If the assumption was the initial annoyance not letting me express what I could be feeling as a player, the story arcs were the gameplay version that had me feeling smothered. Each character's arc has a lot of effort put into them, traversing to places exclusive to their plots, as they explore their personal struggles and fight unique bosses. As someone who did all the quest lines, I know how rough what I'm about to say is going to sound, but I was over the concept pretty quick, and in truth continued out of a self-imposed obligation to the series. Perhaps there was something I would miss that would turn the whole thing around, but I didn't feel much. With 2 exceptions. Because for all of this emphasis, they all progress the same way. Go to a character's room at the lighthouse, they'll tell you about a problem and you head with them. The mission will either be a conversation to set up a later conflict or a mission similar to the main game with exploration and combat. The companions felt to me like a character getting a story arc in a tabletop campaign. That chapter isn't about the group exploring an aspect of that character, rather a single player game about them. As a companion character, that doesn't sound so bad in an actual video game, but that intention feels disconnected from the others. The storylines of your companions are generally connected with the concept of Elganon and Gillinane, led by smaller players, causing a stir in their personal lives, and your goal as team leader is to assist. I wasn't a big fan of this direction. I found it to be overbearing. With companions, I'm of the mindset I would rather want more of a character than getting too much, and this is a core part of why during my first playthrough at around the 50-hour mark I was itching for those credits. Because so much runtime is spent on these personal conflicts, missions being a slow progression before an impactful moment, where a majority of the time at the end the player would make a big defining choice for how it pans out. It was this progression that had me grimace as we went along, because there were no shakeups. Each character had a very similar progression as you and a third companion tag along for their storyline, often with this story told to you, not with you. I could see the characters conveying emotion and having these big moments, but a good chunk of the time I couldn't buy into it. There was no Cassandra moment where she made up her own mind about her situation, no disagreement that leads to a duel like Sten's, no choice you make leading to ultimatums from a companion. It's always pleasant, or with a slight attitude but ultimately understanding about it. I felt no stakes. I felt no satisfying conflict or strife, not that one, besides what the game was insisting was important. And in the moment, I would go, oh wow, but it wouldn't stick with me 20 minutes later. To highlight what I mean, let's talk about Lucanus. I had such high hopes for this character. In the promotional screenshots, I thought this guy looked dope. And in Teven Crow Companion sounds awesome, and hearing the Vows of Vengeance podcast and his guest appearance, I was looking forward to seeing more in Veilguard. A core part of Lucanus' character is the connection with Spite, the demon inhabiting his body. As a character, this was a green flag interest-wise. Demonic possession is a fascinating concept to lean into, especially seeing how it was presented in 2. A spirit of justice fusing with Anders to become vengeance, showing the struggle of a good, for lack of a better word, spirited beings exposed to the mortal world, witnessing how the rules that bound its existence are far more messy than in the Fade, and how that virtue could be smushed around becoming something else in the name of a good end. With the emphasis of this spiritual guest being a demon and not a spirit, I wondered what direction they would go into. Perhaps a frightening aspect that makes trust come very slowly for the party. A mutual agreement, Dark Urge style, indulging in a common purpose. Maybe even a well-earned team-up where that negative aspect of the creature is channeled with a mutual understanding. The answer is the third in a general concept, but jumps the gun on the progression to get there. When you meet Lucanus early on, there's a struggle. Spite will scream at the crow, demanding to speak or wanting to take the meat suit for a spin. Stop being selfish, it's my turn with the body. Lashing out when ignored for too long. The party is lightly distrusting of the situation, and you can voice it too, and the assassin will say he has it under control, trust him. With Lucanus, there's an emphasis on coffee. It's a subject that stirs passion. A cup of joe is more than just a drink. It's a moment to get your bearings, a vehicle to catch up with a buddy before the others wake up in the morning, or a chance to enjoy the smaller things. That was something I could connect with in Lucanus. Here, this guy was a professional, but also someone who took his life one step at a time, savoring the small moments that make up a lifetime. And there's a dual purpose here. The reason the guy won't stop talking about coffee is the caffeine. Spite takes over when he's asleep, so enjoy a few cups and that's no longer a problem. But there's only so much you can drink before you crash. That buildup is a conflict waiting to escalate. Sadly, it's got no teeth. When Spite is in control, nothing impactful happens besides one scene. The biggest thing is a bloody nose from the host. The stakes have no payoff. In one scene, Lucanus falls asleep. The companions are preventing Spite from walking through the alluvion, and it's presented like a bit. Harding's pleas for help like a child asking for their parent to step in. Uncle Spite, give me your keys. You're not taking Lucanus out to the crossroads, you're possessed. He wakes up and look at the time, it's Joe o'clock. You can't solve this with coffee, Lucanus. I'll be more careful next time. How are you gonna handle that? I'll take care of it. End of scene. I was curious how they were going to handle the spite aspect, but it functions like a punchline. A quirky sidekick where serious things are suggested or teased, but nothing dramatic is followed through. During his questline, you fight the one who fused the two together. On the visual front, it's really cool. A pool of blood makes up most of the arena, and it's also interesting how blood is lathered to her skin, both acting as a sensor and displaying her parasitic tendencies as she soaks. But afterwards, it's another scene where the stakes are teased but not followed through, and another example where Ilario comes across as so sketchy you're convinced the game is intentionally setting him up for a twist, only to discover, haha, surprise! Ilario was a clever sneak the whole time! And then it turns into this finale where Spite decides to help Lucanus, and they can bond together or go their separate ways respectfully after the whole god business, depending on what player one has to say about the situation, of course. Why is this so amicable? There hasn't been much to show growth with the two. Bonding over their anger at Ilario, sure, but there's an option to bond over saving his grandmother, Katerina. Like, why would a demon of spite want to be on board for that? Isn't that contradictory to its nature, even if it was formally a spirit of determination? There's so much focus on what's happening in each scene for the overall story, it doesn't firmly establish this dynamic. So when it occurs, I found it came out of nowhere. But take the demon part out of Lucanus' character, and I just find the guy so milquetoast. Yes, he's a crow, but there's no uncomfortable aspect explored. He's a nice guy who's polite and loves a good cup of coffee. There's no tension with his title as the Demon of Virantium, or being titled a mage killer, not even with other casters, or your mage party members. They all just get along swimmingly. Great for a company picnic, not very compelling for a story focused on these characters. Lucanus and other aspects of the character lean more into a lighthearted, cozy fantasy aesthetic that is a hard contrast to what came before. Zevran is a great example. A part of the Wardens, a good chunk of his story is tracking down the Gloom Howler, balancing out the dark reveals of the Wardens, showing the lengths they would go for the greater good, and his bond with Hassan, paving the way for a more hopeful legacy. Don't get me wrong, the Griffin's cute, but majority of his character hinges on the feathered friend. Take Hassan away and he's a nice guy who's a bit stern and tough, but also has a great heart and attacks problems head on. There's this one scene with Zevran that was my favorite. After Weishaupt, he confides in Rook, thinking back to the companions lost and questions his future. When an archdemon shows up, they kill it and both will die. That's just how it works. He shouldn't be alive. What is he supposed to do now? And I loved this scene. It was the one time I could connect with this character. I had a similar thought process in Origins. While sacrificing for the greater good is sad, it's also easy, because that conclusion is etched on a tombstone. The work is done. What comes after is out of your hands. It's freeing in that sense. The mission comes for those who dwell in the world after the goodbye. That's the hard part. I can see how Zevran could struggle with survivor's guilt for an event like that. However, this is a conflict that gets resolved in the same scene. Rook goes, well, you have Hassan. And Zevran goes, oh yeah, that's right. Hassan chimes in, end of scene. Zevran is fine, but I didn't find anything else compelling about him, and truthfully got old of the gingerwort comments pretty quick. And that reminds me of an aspect that contributes to a lot of my grievances with Veilguard. The writing. All of these things that bothered me so far, the choices, the toned down setting, the companions, and engaging with the world, are all aspects conveyed through the writing. Now, I say this not as an English major and not as a professional in the field, but the writing is off. A good chunk of scenes have characters speaking in cliches and quips that go back to that superhero comparison without the charm. In Dragon Age, there was a style to the dialogue that was similar to our world, but not quite. Pop culture references were made, but no direct copies, and it was reliant on the characters saying them. I still think back to that scene in Origins where Loghain is speaking with the Landsmate, and Ban Tegan questions his authority, and look how that's conveyed.
You have declared yourself Queen Anora's regent, and claim we must unite under your banner for our own good. But what of the army lost at Ostagar? Your withdrawal was most fortuitous.
I love that scene because it conveys the message, why should we ride with you? You betrayed those at Ostagar. But it's skillfully spoken, because it's not directly stated Loghain did that, but that's implied, which explains the murmurings in the crowd. It's a questioning of judgment without making a statement, rather a suggestion for how it appears. Also, his zinger at the end to Anora, iconic.
Ban Tegan, my father is doing what is best.
Did he also do what was best for your husband, Your Majesty?
The writing could be funny or dark or morbid, but it stemmed from the characters. Alistair would tell a joke differently than Varric, same with playing a sarcastic hawk. Good character writing has a bunch of different components, but it's also something you can tell. If there's a good line or a funny joke, you react. Maybe you go, oh, that's good, or start laughing, compared to serviceable that gets the job done, but not that memorable, to the negative that gets a reaction, although not what was intended. While there were some great lines, most were serviceable with a few that had me dumbfounded. What got to me in particular was how modern the dialogue sounded. The suspension of disbelief is a powerful thing. It's what makes playing video games such an immersive experience when all we're doing is putting inputs into a controller. But that balance is tricky because once it's broken, it's tough to get back in the groove. In RPGs, I found a good way that's created is having the dialogue fit within the universe. It communicates information by its rules, perhaps similar to ours or Alien. That's going to vary, of course. A game like Tyranny is going to sound a lot different than Deltarune. Ultimately, it comes down to intention. Dragon Age has spent a lot of time creating its own world, and it's got its own terms and way of speaking. What I noticed in Veilguard is that while it uses those terms, most characters deliver them with modern jargon. When developing Veilguard, the plan by former creative director Matthew Goldman was to have an emphasized lighthearted tone, featuring Whedon-esque dialogue that has been quite prominent in pop culture recently. A direction that was altered seeing the reception to Forspoken, a game going with a similar tone that was mocked relentlessly on the internet. Ultimately, that initial tone is prevalent throughout the game. While I think Bellara is an alright character I'd enjoy more in a different game, with Veilguard, I couldn't get behind her. Her lines were going with this high energy, curiosity about everything science angle, contributed by the music going for a more whimsical direction or as a punchline to a joke. When her lines weren't discussing what was happening in the plot or a device, a good chunk was this quipping that could deflate most of the serious events.
Well, wasn't expecting to fight an ogre today. Then again, I also didn't expect to learn that my gods are rampaging around and trying to end the world. Just one of those days.
That line occurs after introducing that enemy type. The way the shot tries to build this up with the swapping between views and the red light in the background before making itself known tries to be intimidating. Yet combined with the redesign and dialogue, it feels goofy. He looks like he's about to tell me a really funny joke. Especially odd considering this is the same enemy type that killed Hawk's sibling and crunched King Caitlyn's spine in Ostagar. Here are a couple of lines from other characters that show what I mean by sounding modern.
Solus lived here, the Dreadwolf. It was gonna have quirks.
Solus is the worst tenant I followed, and that's saying something.
Maybe they like you.
On time ahead. Be ready. They go hard.
Almost there. I just have to... Shit! Sorry.
Can I help?
No, I've got it. Mostly.
Hey, if napping works, then nap away.
I'm heading out to practice my new magic. I could use some moral support.
I hate these things. Everything about them is wrong.
That's why it's a job for professionals.
Remy, where are you hurt?
Everywhere.
What's wrong?
A lot.
There were also a couple of dialogue options that were represented with the text, oof. Well, I agree with what Dorian was saying. A codex entry called To Vinter's Shame has a section that reads like an apology posted on social media. I am ashamed I ever did, and will be eternally grateful to those who helped me re-examine my beliefs. One line I found myself perplexed with was with Bellara after Weishaupt. As she laments about fighting her own gods, Rook can say, as an elf remember, we are not them. We can stand at our own 2 feet and learn to be better, which I thought was a cool, hopeful line. And Bellara goes, that feels too easy, like we're not taking responsibility. And that got me to think, by whose standard? Rook asks, what good does feeling guilty do as well? And that's met with an, I don't know. That just feels like a weird line to put in the game, especially for one elf to say to another. There's a prevailing habit where conversations happen while fighting, and I'm not talking about cool ones, like companions giving remarks or notes during combat, like "on your left," or giving attaboys, landing a critical hit. That stuff is awesome, and it was the closest I got to really clicking with the party. I mean full conversations where one slip up and we die has multiple lines of dialogue from multiple characters. Not just teammates, but bosses too, remarking how powerful they are or how special their position is. And it's hard to take any of it seriously. Like, if we can speak more than battle cries, then we're probably not that focused on the actual fight. It's more in line with a shonen anime than a tense fantasy battle. And with shonen, there's a gradual pace to the fight. Talk, fight, talk. Here, it's talking during the fighting, and it's distracting.
You can't stop Venatoris. This power worldwide. Impressive wisdom guard. Can you The Venatoris power is on the rise, and this part's mine. Was I here, Venatori?
I might have questions for him. Here to check on me.
I wasn't expecting a fight. Or this much of a fight.
Well, surprise.
Audience with you. Will you level me? You are a failed experiment, not worthy of my time. I am the right hand of Zara. You will fall.
When I hear stuff like this, I find it hard to take the action seriously. If the game treats it like it's not tense, how can I? The dialogue has a habit of being really wordy too, preparing word salad when fewer would have gotten the same point across. Like, there's this line from Strife on the Gods.
If we could predict where they'd strike next, we might get ahead of them. But so far, they've been unpredictable.
I find this line weird because you could have just had him say, "The gods have been unpredictable." Sure, it's not particularly good stuff, I suggest, but it's brief and it conveys the same message. And sometimes it's got this feeling of words being said to say something without really adding anything besides the scene going longer or already implied.
I'll try not to die. We'd prefer you didn't.
So be careful.
And often the dialogue states directly what's being said without room for subtlety.
You don't understand the power they have. They show you what you crave. They speak to the darkness in your heart. No one can stand against that.
Watch me.
I won't be the last to surrender. I felt the evil.
Let's go. No point arguing with the dead man.
No.
But it would be unfair of me not to say there weren't legitimately good lines or scenes. While you can tell my frustration with the dialogue, it does have great moments as well.
I said Treviso was the trap, and I meant it. The jewel of Antiva. She sings even while caged.
You were never ready to make the sacrifices that leadership requires.
The gods, they give strength. But all they ask in return is everything.
Mortal threats are a dull blade.
You saw me as an opponent. To me, you were an irritation, a fly buzzing ceaselessly.
I must speak to you in this tongue. It seems Elven is beyond your grasp.
As much as freedom is beyond yours.
You were never ready to make the sacrifices that leadership requires.
I found a good chunk of the writing in this game to be distracting. While there's no particular one thing that was a deal breaker, it came together into multiple frustrations with it. The one that I would consider the worst is the stakes. Talking with the Inquisitor, you learn this isn't just a problem in the North. This Rise of the Gods is framed as spreading fear and corruption worse than any blight in history. As the game goes along, you'll get updates from the Inquisitor, and in this low-key sort of way, opening a letter bearing the Inquisition symbol, you get the news that most of the South is blighted. The majority of the population are dead or scattered. The same location you have spent years engaging with the world and characters is just completely devastated off screen. It was a gut punch on parchment and one of the most devastating parts of this game. I found it to be a cheap way to amp up the threat without earning it. The problem in the North wasn't high enough. It had to absolutely devastate the South too. And if they were going to do this as a core focus, I could see it working. This could be just the kick in the ass to make the player feel the tension, realize how big this is and take it seriously. This contributes to my big issue with the characterization of the companions. With that point about the South getting completely devastated, You would think this would be a big deal, right? A good portion of the continent getting blighted should get people to buckle down and take this seriously, right? These are the same companions who will ask Rook if he'd like to go on a picnic in Artherthing Forest, who will have book clubs, and Lucanus will mention how accurate the boring parts of being an assassin are, who, in Harding and Emmerich case, decide to take a camping trip to Ferelden after reading It's Completely Decimated, where Nev will keep remarking how cute the wisps are, and Bellara writes her fanfiction. I am all for the simple pleasures. It's where the zest of life comes from, and I think it's cool the companions are enjoying it. But if you are going to raise the stakes in the series to not just be manageable, but world-ending, repeatedly saying this is the worst it has ever been in the history of the world, and then show this, I know I'm gonna come across like a total dick, but for the love of God, get off your ass! We do not have time for this! When the entire world is getting ravaged because we're not there, this would consistently create extreme whiplash and made me resent these characters in the thick of Act 2! I swear, Lucanus, if you tell me how much you enjoy coffee one more time, I'm gonna pour the Java off the lighthouse! Oh, I'm sorry, I can't express that! Good job, Lucanus! Proud of you, yes, bestie! I'm being hyperbolic here. I'm just getting riled up. I get this could have been a last-minute inclusion by the development team, yet it just sours my taste of the game, and I really wish they just cut it. Having a series setting you care about just getting destroyed is rough. Having that setting destroyed off-screen, I don't understand why that was the direction they went in. I just don't get it. I've not come across a single person who thought this was a cool idea. Baffling at best and mean-spirited at worst. Oh, and I forgot about the post-credits scene. I was going to play it at the end of the video, but the red lyrium has infected my bloodstream, so let's talk about it here. The spoilers abound, of course. So when I beat the game, I was really impressed with the ending. I thought it was great, and I'll be discussing that later. Then on YouTube, I saw there was a hidden ending linked to fighting secret bosses and interacting with these circles. I was intrigued by what could be said. The main game wrapped up so nicely. What else could be added? One aspect of long-term storytelling that I find myself popping a blood vessel over is the retcon. Taking something that worked before, and then when another installment comes out, revealing that understandable order of events wasn't done by them, it was actually done by someone else. Now, if it was planned beforehand or following up on something not explored in the initial moment, I could see that working. Ultimately, it comes down to planning. If you're counting on the audience going along with it, there's gotta be some preparation, which can be appreciated if people go back and watch before the reveal. I've been watching The Venture Brothers, and I've been really impressed with how that show handles this through multiple seasons. When I saw this secret ending in Veilguard, I was so butthurt. It's not something I thought was possible. It took what came before and invalidated the parts I found made it really compelling. Taking a page out of World of Warcraft Shadowlands book, it turns out that there was an even bigger threat hiding in the shadows, the Executioners, a group mentioned in Inquisition, and in truth, I didn't know existed until I looked it up. They're the puppeteers orchestrating all the events through the series. The Magisters who traveled to the Golden City creating the first Darkspawn, no longer caused by unchecked ambition and pride to push the bounds, but controlled by them. Loghain's betrayal at Ostagar was not just the actions of someone who grew paranoid of being under Orlesian rule for a good chunk of his life, seeing the folly in the current ruler, the son of his best friend, and his call that doomed the kingdom, sacrificing lives for the greater good, ensuring Ferelden would never be beaten like his dog as a child. It was pushed by the Executioners. Dragon Age 2's events wasn't a story about immortal conflict, paranoia bubbling to a breaking point and shattering the chance of compromise, a tale where no one starts a villain but gets twisted into one by their desperation and powers not worth the cost. It was spurred on by the Executioners affecting Bartrand. Inquisition's conflict with Solus manipulating Corypheus to unlock the anchor and joining your team when the plan went off course. Turns out the Executioners had a hand in that too. I really don't like this. It's stolen valor. These characters had motivations that were understandable, affecting the world as the games continued, actions that would even get referenced through the series. But when it's decided that it wasn't just these characters making choices that made sense to them, but actually the inner workings of a secret order's machinations the whole time, it weakens the impact of those choices to begin with. The characters didn't have their own motivations, they were played by a group that's barely been mentioned. I find that really lame. If the seed was planted earlier and foreshadowed earlier, I may have even been excited at the idea. But I found this to be really frustrating as a fan. It discounts the idea any villain had a part to play in affecting the world without the assistance of this group waiting in the dark, rarely talked about and only introduced in the third game. The executioners ride the coattails of what came before, and I found it not to be earned, and I would vent to all my poor friends willing to listen as to why I was so furious. So at this point, I've been very critical of Veilguard. As the game continued, with all the issues I mentioned earlier, I had my fill and I was wishing for it to end. Even without seeing a lot of the talking points online. I wanted to really like this game, but I struggled to. There were moments I would question why I'm even here as a companion was having a dramatic moment. So much effort was spent on these characters and I felt quite apathetic to most of their plotlines. I found it strange we spent so much time with their personal struggles, but then I'm the one who decides how their fate pans out. I'm exercising my agency in their lives. That doesn't make me feel like I'm a helping and trusted friend, but a player whose flavor of companion I want adjusted to my whims. For example, I actually found Taash to be pretty cool. Personality-wise, I appreciated the variety in having a more straight-to-the-point and gruff character and not just pleasant. But I found it bizarre their plotline was about finding their identity and the culture they embrace is based on my decision as the main character. That feels hypocritical to their whole storyline. It feels like the game wants me to buy into this group, see their individual struggles and connect with their arcs, but it's this desire to let me make choices and exert my will I struggled to do so. These emotional story moments become very standard, approached more mechanically than getting me to think what would be the best for these characters. Perhaps a great middle ground would have been how you talked with companions throughout their arcs being the deciding factor in what they choose to do. That way the player would be affecting the world and the companions are making the choices for themselves in these big moments. With that said, there is one character storyline I really enjoyed, and easily a highlight in the game for me. One that follows a nearly identical function to the others with my input deciding how it goes. But it's a choice I actually struggled to answer and found very compelling. And that is the man, the myth, the absolute legend.
Oh. Professor Emmerich Volkaren of the Morn.
When I saw this guy in the reveal trailer, I wasn't expecting much. He seemed a bit snooty with his demeanor, and I assumed he'd be a pompous necromancer who was trying so hard to be Dorian. But you know what they say about assuming. Emmerich was my ride or die companion in this game. Any big story moment, I had this guy on my team. Playing a Reaper, I would capitalize on inflicting necrotic damage, brute forcing that element regardless of a foe's resistances on underdog difficulty. That wasn't very optimal, a very fit the square shape into the circle hole approach, but I found myself enjoying it. Both our playstyles complemented the others, the warrior charging out while the caster took pot shots, using the same element to hammer foes into submission. And personality-wise, he's a delight. He seemed like one of the few companions that was interested in really getting to know Rook as a person. When he talked about his love for spirits and the dead, I could really believe what he was saying. The game does a wonderful job of balancing the macabre and the pleasant with them, embodied in Manfred, his skeleton ward that was treated more like a son than a servant. A spirit of curiosity inhabiting a cranium cage. The bones donated from many others, a gift from those on the next stage after leaving their mortal coil, like leaving a penny in the tray just in case someone needs it. There's a layer of compassion with the Mornwatch, accepting what comes, and I could see how Emmerich embodies that idea. It was in the way he would talk, the goodwill he radiated with every character felt in tone with what the developers wanted, even discussing grim subjects. And with him, I could get on board with it. Professor Emmerich is an older person, and that aged wisdom, the closer you reach the final destination, is a welcome addition to the party. That trip to the end is what his storyline is about. In your first conversation, as you walk through the gardens of the Grand Necropolis, returning spirits to their rightful places, he'll confide his fear of death. Passing on has been a part of his life ever since he was taken in all those years ago. And witnessing that transition firsthand, watching so many go, I could totally get how that would lead to a fear of what comes afterward. If there's a track that's been laid out before you, of course you would feel scared when it suddenly stops. And it's in this quiet scene, two people just talking, that was one of the most compelling moments. And it was a subject as a player I could relate to. I don't know what comes after. I have my hopes, most certainly. But as Emmerich expressed his worry, I could see him as a dynamic character. No quips undercutting the moment, the game let the tone linger as he discussed his plan of lichdom. Not the usual kind, spellcasters using forbidden magic sustaining their unholy life force with the souls of others, portrayed as evil entities. A lich is the highest rank of the Mordwatch. While keeping the aesthetics of the concept, it's being a guardian to creation and embracing immortality, a creed that his former colleague Hezenkos challenges, an artificial half-lich who lost her way in pursuit of power, and a dark mirror for what Emmerich could become, an additional point in his conflict. And as his questline continues, you see his conviction on the matter and his love for Manfred, all set up for his choice. During the climax of his questline, Manfred will be crushed, a final act to save his master. But the day is saved, and after so many years, Emmerich can now take his place bearing the hallowed rank of Lich. However, it comes at a price. Procedure must be followed through. A Lich is apart from the mortal world and must not manipulate the natural flow of life and death. No special treatment, not even to a spirit loved as a son. As Emmerich struggles between his options, this is where the player makes a judgment call, insisting he embraces his role as Lich or bring back Manfred. I found this to be the most satisfying and complex choice in the game, because Emmerich is such an interesting character, either would be fitting. As a person, he's perfect for the role. That goodness and compassion would be immortal, a protector to life and death, and a very capable one. The world would be a much better place with him in it. Yet, on my playthrough, I picked Manfred. Granted, Manfred was the goofy side character that really did it for me. I enjoyed his antics anytime he was on screen. However, what made me pick this choice was Emmerich himself. Since that first conversation, death has been something he's struggled with. The role of Lich has very selfless aims. I also saw it as a way to avoid that fear. While his Lich form looks really cool, and I can't deny having a skeleton teammate sounds dope, I appreciated the character enough to think what would be best for him. And I thought that was Manfred. Immortality and purpose are powerful things, but I thought Emmerich needed acceptance, knowing one day he'll have to make that journey to the afterlife and not be afraid of it, but accepting death like an old friend, just like we all have to at some point. But something I don't think gets talked about is how immortality isn't just in the straightforward sense, but in what you leave behind. There's this saying, leave the world in a better place than when you found it. And while I occasionally find myself thinking that's too simple, I'm me, what could I be doing that makes life a better place? Ultimately, regardless of the person, it's true. We have no idea how our actions will affect the world, and even when there's no direct feedback, it can stick with people. That's why there's such an emphasis to be kind, because you have no idea what another person is going through, and that could be just the thing that keeps them around. Or it's a throwaway gesture. The uncertainty keeps it fun. But often, what we leave behind takes a meaning on its own. Family, friendships, what we work on or create, and often in ways we could never predict. While a lot of life, and especially the culture, celebrates what we get out of things, it's rarely given attention to what is given. It's not very showy, it's not as enviable or attractive, but it's real. And it's what makes the whole process worth it in the end. Fame is the insecure child that cries and jangles keys for attention to validate its importance, and there will never be enough to be satisfied. Love is what stays with others long after we're gone, even when the time together has passed and the memories fade. It's the feeling that stays with those we affected. That's an immortality I could get behind. And it's a gift I believe Emmerich deserves. And I enjoyed this line he says after making the choice.
I have moments of regret for what Lichdom might have been. But none would make me exchange this for anything.
Emmerich's storyline was such a highlight. Everything hit just right for my first playthrough, and it was right on the same page with the developer's intentions. Offering a choice I could see working either way. In fact, I've seen people in videos online after, completing the game, making solid cases for either. That's a cool choice. And that's what I find makes Veilguard hurt, because for as long as I've been discussing my issues, the good stuff isn't just good, it's spectacular. Emmerich is my favorite companion in this game. Up there is one of the series' greats. A funny coincidence, that slot is filled with another necromancer. And that got me to be quite charitable with other parts of the experience, like the gameplay that can be a lot of fun too. Getting your build together can be wicked. Seeing my shield throw move change color for my subclass was neat, and the idea of unique equipment is novel. It's like a legendary weapon, but it has a trade-off, like gaining health on hits, but not healing from potions. Or in this playthrough, finding this wicked saber that is low base damage, but procs bleed with everything, which could melt certain enemies. After a storyline like that, I found a lot of fun to be had. I'd be jumping across buildings or getting lost in cool environmental details, like how the water looks in the wetlands, getting into fights and aptly listening to my companions strike up conversations. There are good times to be had here. While I was all in for Emmek's storyline, the levels, the story, the charm was all there for me, I must admit the areas for everyone's quest lines were neat, and a lot of the big moments were presented very well. I found myself getting caught up in them even when investment was low for most of the quest line. One I keep thinking back to is Taash. Their finale was actually really cool, taking place in a volcano as we dealt with the Dragon King, and I keep thinking back to that line Shathan would tell her child, Shakrato Ebra. Not to say you struggle with who you are, but through struggle, you discover who you are. The two have a complicated relationship. There's a love there, but also a lot of resentment and a struggle to really get where the other is coming from. As much as I didn't like the timing of this scene with the South getting destroyed, I thought the dinner scene was good. Tasha's mother tries to put the concepts of their pronouns in correlation with the Qun, but it just riles them up even further. Why can't their way of doing it be enough? With the character Taash has been so far, a short fuse that's often blunt but means well, I could see this scene working. And in the volcano, there's no happy ending where they reconcile, just a declaration that Taash has embodied Shakrato Ebra and then dies from blood force trauma. That's an unexpected payoff. With a lot of the game, I found it playing it safe, but in scenes like these, they actually did some gutsy stuff, like the Ember quest line. I was surprised they killed off Manfred and gave a great choice to bring him back or keep him a memory. I mentioned earlier that at around the 50-hour mark I was burned out and really just wanted the game to be over. As I kept going, seeing these scenes and achieving each companion to Veilguard status, I was getting excited to see how it all panned out. And that final act, what a payoff. The final mission in Veilguard was the most invested finale in any of the games for me. Everything your party and faction have been working towards in dealing with the elven gods comes to fruition, and there's an intensity about it I found myself really enjoying. All beginning with the Butcher, the commanding Antam in Treviso who ultimately gives you the god's location with his death. I wish this guy was around longer for the game because he was such a highlight. A Quinari warlord that loved this city not for what it could be, but for what it was. His scenes, writing, and voice acting are so good, and it sets a high bar the remaining game maintains. Here's a sentence I never expected myself to say playing a video game. I got my girlfriend killed. When the party landed on Tearstone Island, we had to pick someone to be in charge of the distraction party. My options were Zevran or Harding. During that playthrough, I was romancing the scout. When I heard Veilguard was going to have her as a companion, the significant other choice was easy. Throughout a good chunk of the game, while I tried to be a fair team coach, giving everyone a chance to contribute, Harding was one of my constants. In the prologue, I picked her for the ritual, and especially pursuing that romance, that added an additional layer to the dynamic. As the leader, Rook would make calls where people got hurt, and Harding would follow them regardless. She wasn't the kind of person to sit on the sidelines when things were going down, so when offering the choice, I got into the character's headspace. I chose Harding to lead. As a scout, she's familiar with natural terrain, and if they got caught, I figured she'd have a better chance to make it out in one piece. And because it was my character's romance, I trusted her. This was a partnership, and who was I to turn down an option where she could contribute? So an hour later, as we're fighting Gillenane and Lucanus is trapped as he clutches onto the lyrium dagger, and when Harding repeats the earlier phrase, whatever it takes, I tensed up. And when she got impaled the first time, I thought, that's a lot more graphic wound than I was expecting, but we'll get a healer. When it happened again, I went quiet, and as she fell into the near endless hole of blight, I was stunned. When I play games with choices, I find myself trying to pick the good options. As years have gone by, I've been working to embrace more messier, non-optimal ones. And in here, I was expecting there was a risk people would die, but not actually follow through. When the game took the character I was romancing and had her pass for my choices, I was impressed. At the risk of creating a huge red flag, my immediate thought as Harding plummeted into the blight below was, wow, this is great fuel for character development. As the mission continued, I kept thinking, I can't believe the game had the guts to kill off a companion. I thought with the tone we'd all ride off into the sunset, but that's not the case. After the mission, I got curious and looked it up. No matter what you do, at least one companion would die. The perfect run didn't exist. And thinking about it more, it's a great call. You're lulled into a false sense of security, and then here's a gut punch. In hindsight, it makes sense too. Both Harding and Zevran's questlines have solid conclusions, with the Scout sharing the Titan's gift with the people of Kal Shirak, and the Warden assisting in a new age of Griffins. It's tidy, neat, and good foreshadowing for what is to come on the island, like the old cop doing one last job before retirement. And that moment makes things interesting. It gets you paranoid about your choices. When you start laying out pieces on the board, issuing companions to deal with the invading threat, a part of you worries if this is a good call. Having Lucanus deal with a Venatori mage sounds like a perfect fit, but is it that easy? What if it's a misdirection or there's an unknown factor in play? The follow-through got me to really weigh what I did in this section, fist pumping if a plan worked out and eyes taped to the screen when it seemed to come apart. It was so good. The character and I were in alignment. My choices had impacts and I was all in as the factions banded together against the gods. As mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed the Solus moments in this game, both from previously established parts and how he's handled as a villain, because it's framed as an ally of circumstance. Knowing the character, you already have an impression. As the story continues, you get this connection with the guy. Whether exploring the crossroads or just the main story, you look past the title and to see the person underneath. Perhaps even gain an appreciation for him, reliving the good times from Inquisition. Yet, he's also soulless. In all the negative ways too. Much like the previous game, Solus lies but only by omission. He's clever, too much for his own good, and you could have doubts and can voice them, so when he betrays you, it isn't all that shocking. And how he does it is something that I find myself uncertain about. The twist that Varric's been dead after the prologue, with Solus using blood magic to keep the image alive, checkmate you foolish child. For the most part, I do think it's a good idea. The strike looked very serious, so you're betting it's going to be a big deal. And the first time you talk to him, check out how the scene reveals it.
Why tear down the veil?
Listen. You have no idea what you have done. This is your responsibility now.
Well, look who's still with us.
That intense music, followed by the guitar strum, gets you to let your guard down. Rook was having a moment, but look, Varric is fine. But you may have noticed something off with Bianca being perfectly fine, even though she turned into splinters earlier. On a second playthrough, what makes this really cool is that line we discussed in the Solus section.
I had a plan. Varric always said you'd have a big explanation for why none of this was your fault.
Varric?
Yeah, he said that's your style. Never quite lies, clever half-truths that let you convince yourself you're doing the right thing. He tried to talk to you anyway, and now he's hurt.
Varric is quite practiced at shading the truth himself.
This is my favorite Solus moment in the game, because you can tell when he sees this as an opportunity, holding back on revealing the truth as a new angle. That's what makes the Varric scene so brilliant, because Varric tells Rook everything they want or need to hear. If you like the character, you go along with it. That's just what Varric does. But on a replay, you see how Solus manipulates you, putting on the illusion his influence is only in the fade, as you let your guard down with a figment of your imagination with the face of a friend, molding you without even knowing it. That's a cool way to do a twist. However, while I find those components fantastic, I also cult it before the reveal. The fact that companions wouldn't respond to Varric was off. In certain conversations, it was natural. In others, something was definitely bizarre. But the core issue is that Solus's plan hinges entirely on Harding and Nev not saying anything about it. The characters who saw the moment happen at the same time. One even hauling his dead body from the ritual site. The first Harding conversation is one moment I think works. She's really broken up about the prologue. First time through, you assume it's all because she's freaked out at the stakes, wanting to deal with this situation ASAP. And for the most part, that's true. But then this occurs.
No, you can take some time to just...
Now you sound like Varric. Varric and I started this, and I can't stop. Not now. Don't ask me to.
That's good writing, because you think it means because Varric is injured, Harding will be taken over. But what she means is that he's dead and she needs to finish it. Two different interpretations for those talking. But that's the best line, because on two occasions, Harding will imply what happened to Varric, and it's always shot down with, he knew the risks.
So, we stopped the ritual.
And Varric paid the price.
Hey, Varric made his choice to go talk with Solus. He knew the risks. We all did.
Elven gods escape from their prison, Solus is in your head, and we're scrambling to figure out what to do. And Varric?
Varric knew the risks. He knew what it might cost.
We're still standing. The fight's not over.
Here's what really bothers me about this. because these lines hinge on the characters dealing with information in a very specific way. It has to be delivered and followed up in a controlled manner, one that can be frustrating as a player, because you may notice something is wrong, but you don't have the agency to follow up on it. And this twist hinges its success on how well it plants clues. But in dialogue, you don't get to voice it directly. When you're talking with Varric's spirit in the Fade, the last conversation together, you can say you've always known, and ask why never Harding didn't say anything, and he'll respond, "They thought you knew." Which is really confusing, because Rook will sit in the lighthouse and just talk to an empty bed from everyone else's view, and they carry on like nothing is wrong. And especially for a team that is so focused on looking out for each other and doing things together, I have a hard time believing no one would ever directly ask Rook or get the impression they didn't know. No one corrects them or breaks the news, it's danced around in the writing. When Solus lies, it works because he's a smart character, so he'll give an answer that works multiple ways. Before Weishaupt, he has a great line on lying.
You know I could just lie to you, right?
Indeed. But the truth is merely recalled, while a lie must be constructed. Knowing you would expend the effort to construct that lie rather than answer truthfully would tell me a great deal.
And what's clever about that line is while he frames it as seeing through you, knowing Solus, he's the type of person to put that effort into it, or spin the truth a particular way that means something else. For the companions, I really struggle with this function. It relies on the characters not asking any questions, and during this playthrough, I had this line occur in Docktown.
I need to talk to Varric.
I was so rattled, especially as Harding is in frame. He says it out loud within earshot as I'm making exasperated noises and I adjust my glasses to make sure I'm viewing it correctly. I really think she would have said something here. This little detail bothers me because it contrasts with how great of a job the game hinted at this before. With this stuff, it cheapens the overall twist. It can still work, but it's one where the suspension of disbelief is required, and being conscious about it, it's tough to repair that image. Regardless of the execution, I did find myself getting into this scene. Varric has been a series mainstay ever since too, and I thought the send-off was really good. Rook was his own character, but I could really connect with it because it felt like I was saying goodbye to this person I'd known for years. He was always there. I had him as a constant companion in Kirkwall, across the world in Inquisition, and in the rainy streets of Minrathous. That dynamic of teacher and ward between the two was strong for that reason, leveraging the player's own love for the guy. It made it so much easier to get into this character's headspace, and his lines to Rook about choosing his own ending felt very fitting. Varric's the kind of guy who would reassure his killer as he bled out. What he says to you is what he says to a friend, and I appreciated how Veilguard lets me say goodbye to the heart of Kirkwall. So I have a question for you, viewer. What do you think of bad endings? The ones where there's no happily ever after or some type of downer as the credits play themselves. Often I viewed them as fail states. They would lead to misery for the characters and that should be avoided. I need to do everything within my power to prevent that from happening because I enjoy this party and want their lives and my investment to all pan out in the end. It couldn't have all been for nothing. I've been branching out more as time passed. The true ending not necessarily being the end goal unless it's a special circumstance. I tell you this because I really enjoy Veilguard's bad ending. Approaching the final mission, the game reveals the point of no return. See this journey through. And the game will encourage you to do two things. Bump up your faction ranking by doing missions for each group, increasing their chance of their representative's survival, and get your companions to Veilguard rank by doing their quest lines. If you choose not to, ignore their struggles, or start them without committing, they'll die in the mission. One by one, the cast will drop, either for the resolve faltering or making a bad call as the leader. A core part of Rook's struggle is guilt. While I found a lot of what they did was very much not their fault, it's what gets talked about, especially with Varric. But in these moments, Rook's growth is shown magnificently. As the companions die, Rook acknowledges the pain and strife. Okay, not that one. But don't let those feelings swallow them whole. They put off mourning and struggle through the ruined city. The same way they do when Harding or Davrin die, or Bellara or Nev gets taken, or any of the others, romanced or not. The mission must be seen through. When you defeat Elganon as your party is broken and battered, Solus will swoop in with a few wounds himself and see his goal through. All your work has defeated his century-long enemies, a point he congratulates you on, before betraying you one final time and concluding his quest. Veilguard has 3 different ways it can go down. I'm gushing about the bad one right now, so let's keep going. For whatever reason you choose, words are stowed away for fists. As your companions are turned to stone, Solas will impale Rook with the lyrium dagger, exactly like Varric. But there's one thing Rook has that Solas overlooked, which made Varric choose them in the first place. They're adaptable. Solas was the kind of person who will sacrifice anything for his goals, except himself. He's tragic for what he feels, but his survival was always guaranteed in this story. There would be no last stand or giving up his life. Both he and Rook are leaders, but the difference is Rook will pay their pound of flesh. That stab wound was the perfect chance to get Solas's blood. If Rook is going out, Solas is making the trip with him.
Sacrifices that leadership requires.
I really like this ending. Not in an edgy and then they all died sort of way, regardless of the parts I didn't much care for. Even if I loved everything, I still appreciate this ending because it works so well. A common saying that gets mentioned by Rook is whatever it takes. Funny enough, it's also mentioned in Marvel's Endgame for the same reasons. Do what needs to be done. It's not just one that sounds cool, but as a character, and especially with this ending, Rook follows through, accepting the consequences of your actions and tackling them head on. With this ending, the Veilguard ensures a victory at the cost of everything they could give. After that scene, the game suggests this fate could have been avoided with more preparation. It's presented like a bad ending, but I find myself liking it, and I gotta commend the developers for making this an actual choice, one that fits with Rook as a character, letting them finish the goal, just not in a way that offers a sunset to walk toward. Though the second ending is great too. Instead of confronting Solas straightforwardly, you play his game. Swap the lyrium dagger and sabotage his attempt at the ritual. Solas, once a spirit of wisdom, also carries a lot of pride. A title like Dreadwolf can make someone powerful, but also gives a dangerous assumption they're not an actual person underneath. Perhaps that's why the Inquisitor and Solas could get along really well, because they could connect in a way no one else got, much like a Meriden in Jaws of Hakon. But when Solas said goodbye in Trespasser, he didn't have anyone who really got it. So it went to his head. When Rook meets him, he constantly walks the line between being the person he is, but also so full of his own glory as the Dreadwolf, so sure he's the smartest guy in the room, and everyone is lesser than him. And that's what makes this ending satisfying, because while he thought he was just so clever with the Varric stuff, he overlooked how similar you both were. Not in title, Rook doesn't command the same level of danger as the Dreadwolf, but if he had gotten over his own ego, he would have noticed that line Varric said.
One of the strongest pieces on the board, but he tends to think in straight lines.
With this ending, Rook learns. They transcend their role and moves in a different direction, something a younger Solas has done. It was when he grew overconfident as ages passed that the elven god of trickery's own pride led to being caught in the snare. This ending also plays up his arrogance, brandishing it with the same fervor as those he once fought as he plays his final hand, making for a satisfying payoff.
If you will excuse me, the final enchantments require a delicate touch. A delicate touch? You kill Varric, stab me in the back. You're about to drown the world in demons. How are you any different from Elganon, trying to impose your will on all of us? Elganon would have seized his victory by force. You were not crushed by the power of the Dreadwolf. You were bested fairly, by wits alone.
Now the veil is once again tied to the life force of an elven god.
Bested fairly by wits alone. I taught you well.
Varric taught me well, and you killed him.
You think yourself capable of judging me? I have faced things you could not possibly comprehend. You are a mortal! A mortal! And I am... I am a fool who finally met his match.
But suppose you liked Solas, even want the best for him despite himself. Like when you find out about Varric and he promises this time it will be different, you know he can't help himself. The man is driven by duty in a way that sustained him for a long time. For this ending, you need to have collected all the statues revealing Solas's past, his origins as a spirit of wisdom brought to the world by Mythal, his acts against the elven gods, and his origin for fixing his mistakes. And the payoff is what I'd consider the best scene in the entire game, drawing from years of storytelling in this final moment. It starts with your rook wishing for Solas to do the right thing, which sounds quite silly, like why would that change anything? But it's a question that sounds more plausible considering that Solas is someone looking to be talked down. When Rook offers the suggestion, for a few seconds, he will truly consider it, but not agree. Someone needs to bring it home. Enter the Inquisitor. While I was bummed they didn't play a bigger role, I wish they would have swapped clothes and wore some armor depending on class, like Hawk, rather than the cozy silk pajamas. But here, I was so glad they were in this scene. Much like I mentioned in my Inquisition video, my favorite part of the game was the talk with my Quinari caster and Solas near the Alluvion. Two friends trying to save the other however they could. And the moment where they would meet again, that had me so excited for a sequel. And the fact Veilguard gave that was such a gift. If someone picked up Veilguard as their first game, this may not seem like a big deal. But as someone who invested in this, it showed these people working on this cared, and gave it the love it deserved. Hearing Okad deliver those lines to Solas made that nearly decade wait melt away. This is what it was for, and I can only imagine what it had to be like for players who romanced him. But even that isn't enough. Solas is right on the tipping point, he just needs one more push. And Morrigan, host of Mythal, is kind enough to oblige. Solas's oldest friend, his reason for doing what he's done, releases him from his duty. The wrongs committed were done by us both, not solely you. Let that pain go. For someone like Solas, who has lived in countless eras, I bet he always wanted to hear those words. Release yourself of this cause and be free. And that's all it takes for him to follow through. And as if that moment wasn't great enough, listen to the song that plays. When I sat in front of my computer, staying up way later than I should have, I remembered why I loved this series. How it would tell stories in a way only a game could do. I could watch a Dragon Age series on Netflix or read one of the books, maybe someday watch a movie starring some mainstream celebrity as a fan favorite character. But what made this series special to me was how it was a story that felt like mine, just as it could be for you or anyone playing it. Our impact was palatable in this dark world. Every victory felt like a triumph because it was a setting where there weren't always happy endings. And seeing this send-off for Solas, a character I'd grown quite fond of through 2 games, and the Inquisitor I spent over 100 hours of my life with, that's something precious. And when that part of Lost Elf played for the first time, it was so worth it. Dragon Age the Veilguard hurts, not because it's a game with no redeeming qualities, but because of the things it does well and spectacularly. It makes me wonder what it could have been without all the hurdles placed in its way of development. While it's my least favorite game in the series, and frustrating when compared to all the parts I loved about the other games, I still consider it a Dragon Age game. Because underneath all my qualms with it, I do see a project where the developers really tried to make the best game they could, and in parts, they succeeded. Veilguard has my favorite ending in all of the games. When I was recording footage, I was so excited to get to this section of Tearstone Island. Ultimately, I know you got your own opinion about it. Maybe you think it sucks and killed the franchise, or love it, think it's serviceable, or just not interested. Whatever it is, I appreciate your time in seeing where I'm coming from with it as a fan. I get with this kind of video, there's an expectation to rip into this game and start dunking on it, packaged in a snarky tone and modern buzzwords, or a meme of the month to highlight my points. But that's just not me. While I got my frustrations with Veilguard, the runtime of this video certainly highlights that. I also wanted to give praise where I thought it was due. Anyone who creates something deserves so much credit, more than us armchair critics who make a living dunking on the works of those braver than us. Criticism is important. It offers another perspective that someone too close could miss. But equally as important is to commend what works well. Nothing is completely flawed, there's always something worth praising, and perhaps what works may get carried over into the next project, and it creates something really special, regardless of where the developers end up. While the Dragon Age series may be on ice for a while, I think it'll come back someday. Give it about 10 years and I think it's gonna make some kind of return. But even if it doesn't, I'm glad this series exists in the way it does. Ideally, I'd love all the games to be perfect, but the imperfections remind me that the series is made by people, shaping the games to fit particular creative visions or to appeal to players. Everyone working on it, coming together in this large undertaking to see it to completion. They're products, video games meant to entertain. And at least for me, they absolutely have. And I'm glad I have friends who care about them too. They've been a bonding experience, inspiration for stories, and memories I cherish quite a great deal. And if this is the end, thank you, Dragon Age. It was an absolute honor. And thank you for watching. Covering these games has been nearly a year-long endeavor, and I'm grateful you watched it for however long. More videos to come in the future, so subscribe if you'd like to see some more of my stuff, drink plenty of water, and take care of yourself. I'll see you around.